It was November 20th, 2019, and the helicopter circled far above in the freezing wind of the Antarctic. SCP Foundation Site Director Jason Monroe looked down at the isolated above-ground facilities of Provisional Site 344-1. Something about this place made him nervous, edgy, and for good reason. Between 2003 and 2019, 29 Mobile Task Force units and 73 members of D-Class personnel had gone missing here and never been found. Monroe thought he was here for a routine investigation into negligence and mismanagement, but little did he know, he was in for so much more. This is the story of SCP-5545 and one man's journey into his own worst nightmare, literally. But this nightmare began a long time ago, 300 years to be exact. And like most nightmares, it started as a dream. That dream was one of expansion. National powers across Europe wanted to be the first to conquer the globe and expand into new territories, and sent countless exploratory missions off into the unknown to achieve this goal. Any history book will tell you that the first outsiders to lay eyes upon the continent of Antarctica did so in 1820. The reality is that the first ones to get there actually landed in the late 1700s. The hapless explorers ventured into mainland Antarctica and made base camps. Before searching and digging for any useful resources nearby, they came upon a strange discovery. A hallway hidden beneath the ice. Not a passage in the ice, but a true hallway, complete with light fixtures. The confused explorers ventured down into these impossible hallways, and for many of them, it would be the last thing they ever did. No matter how long they walked, it seemed like the hallways just kept going. As they continued to walk for hours, they hoped to find something, anything, and eventually, they did. They passed from these hallways into somewhere different altogether, and most of them were never heard from again. Those who did manage to escape often died or took their own lives soon after. Whatever it was they discovered down there, they didn't want to live with it on their minds. It's believed that over 70 colonial explorers disappeared or died this way, and that most who found these endless hallways beneath the Antarctic ice never returned. The multiple anomalous objects and phenomena that make up SCP-5545 came into the Foundation's hands several centuries later, on September 18, 2003, when during an expedition into the Antarctic, they too found the endless hallways. The Foundation built Provisional Site 344-1 around them, hoping to safely seal them off from any other unwitting Antarctic explorers or researchers. But there was something else lurking beneath the ice in Antarctica, something dangerous. The hallways were designated as SCP-5545-1 and were thought to be the extent of the anomalous activity at the site. But soon SCP-5545-2 was discovered, which resulted in the deaths of 16 researchers. So what exactly is 5545-2? It's an entity so volatile that even knowing about it is considered to be a containment breach. And as a result, it's kept in Provisional Site 344-2. Unlike Site 344-1, 344-2 isn't a physical space. It's conceptual, accessible only through the endless hallways, created with the express purpose of keeping 5545-1 and 5545-2 separate. Why? Because whenever the two come into contact, the result is 5545-3, the network of endless hallways expanding. If they remained in contact, the hallways would continue to expand and the entire planet could be filled with endless hallways in just 4 to 6 hours. While the two are apart though, 5545-3 reverses, but it always would take just a few hours to throw the whole world into a chaos of infinite hallways. SCP-5545 has been given the classification safe. Wait, we're dealing with a mysterious and volatile anomaly that claimed a huge number of lives and still somehow eludes true Foundation understanding, yet the official SCP Foundation classification is safe? How could this be? Monroe was the director of Site-58 and was the definition of no nonsense. Prior to taking the site director position, he was a decorated member of Mobile Task Force Eta-10 and helped contain numerous Keter-class anomalies. He'd been around the proverbial block when it came to anomalous activity, and something about SCP-5545 and the management of Provisional Site 344 seemed awfully suspicious to him, and he had questions. Like how such an unpredictable anomaly could be declared safe, And why had there been such a lapse of communication between the Foundation and Dr. Gabriel Reed, who'd been running the facility for the past 2 decades? And most of all, just what exactly was the mysterious SCP-5545-2? Monroe started to believe that something terrible had happened at the site, and Reed was covering it all up. But to find out for sure, he'd need to go to Antarctica and investigate it himself. Information about this supposedly safe anomaly was highly classified. Those without O5 clearance could face termination for snooping. But that didn't scare Jason Monroe. He dealt with Ketters before. He could deal with this. Or so he thought. Monroe submitted a request and was granted unanimous approval by the O5 Council to travel to Provisional Site 344 and get to the bottom of this mystery. He took a chopper to the base soon after, armed with a concealed firearm and a hostile meme detector, or HMD, to test whether the base and its staff had somehow fallen under a hazardous mimetic effect from SCP-5545. He'd find the answers, or die trying. The moment Monroe arrived, he couldn't help but notice the strange way the staff behaved. They seemed listless, almost oppressive. When he showed his credentials to a researcher, they simply said, SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site 344-2. His request to see Dr. Reed that night was denied. Dr. Reed was busy, he was told. Wait until tomorrow. The next day, Dr. Monroe met with Dr. Reed, but the results of the meeting were underwhelming to say the least. Just like the rest of the staff on the site, he seemed exhausted, as though he hadn't slept in days. His responses were quiet and evasive, and he refused to tell Monroe anything that wasn't in the official files already. Monroe ran the conversation through the HMD and found nothing out of the ordinary. What was going on here? Monroe was irritated, but not deterred. Nothing would stop him from finding out the truth. The next day, he flexed his O5 credentials and hacked into the base's security system. This gave him access to cameras around Site 344-1, but more importantly, there was a single camera inside the mysterious Site 344-2. Jackpot. But when he looked at it, the feed was an entirely black screen with the words SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site 344-2. The footage of the staff in 344-1 was equally strange. The 18 employees on site all sat at computer banks, with nothing but static playing on their screens. Monroe kept digging though, and was able to hack into the security footage of Dr. Reed's office. As he watched, he discovered a 15-minute period where Reed left the office each day. He could use this brief window to break in and collect more intel on SCP-5545-2. Monroe was so wrapped up in the investigation that he almost forgot the more immediate danger around him and nearly wandered into one of the endless hallways of 5545-1 by mistake. He made a note to be more careful in the future. His first attempt at breaking into Dr. Reed's office didn't produce many answers. One piece of evidence was a blurry picture of what looked like a mobile task force entering a 5545-1 hallway in the dark. Another was a spreadsheet featuring all the personnel, living or dead, who worked at the site, but one name, and the details of whether this person was alive or dead, was completely redacted. Anything particularly juicy was hidden behind O5 clearance. If Monroe wanted the answers, he needed to break through. That night, he had a horrific reoccurring nightmare, one that had plagued him since he joined MTF ETA 10. He dreamed that he was in a fancy dining room with a grand fireplace. The room was full of statues of men and women. The men looked angry, and the women looked afraid. As he approached the fireplace, the ceiling extended infinitely up into the darkness. Suddenly, the zombie-like body of a teenage girl appears in the fireplace, hanging from a long thread. Her eyes look furious and full of rage, and Monroe somehow knows that he's the reason for her hate. When he steps into the fireplace in this dream, she attacks him. The two intertwine, and they burn forever. The one difference was that in this new iteration of the dream, he blinked upon entering the fireplace, and suddenly he was in the hallway. He awoke sure that something was terribly wrong here, but he couldn't give up now. The next day, Dr. Monroe broke into Reed's office and made a horrifying discovery. He found files indicating that Dr. Reed was knowingly sending mobile task forces and D-class personnel into the infinite hallways of 5545-1 to their doom. He also found evidence that Reed and the researchers had been spying on him, somehow intercepting copies of the notes he had been taking. That's when Dr. Reed entered the office and interrupted him. Monroe panicked and drew his weapon, holding the doctor at gunpoint. He was breaking so many Foundation rules, but right now, he feared for his life. The doctor seemed unbothered by Monroe's threats though. He told Monroe that everything was going to plan, and that he should go back to his room. Monroe was becoming increasingly paranoid. He felt that at any moment guards might burst in and execute him. Nothing about this place made sense. He worried he was going insane. Perhaps the only way to find answers was to go even deeper, to risk it all, and venture through the endless hallways to find SCP-5545-2 himself, and finally discover what this thing actually was. Monroe left his room and stepped into one of the endless hallways of 5545-1 that was located just across from his dorm. He found that it was a hallway like all the others on site, plain, concrete, worn of age, with simple light fixtures on the walls. He walked for hours, recording with a concealed device. The lights suddenly went out, leaving him in complete darkness. When they flicked back on, he was in a very different environment. A grand old carpeted hallway, the kind you'd see in an old mansion. He broke into a cold sweat. What was so familiar about this place? He kept walking, racked with terror, until this new hallway finally led him to the place he'd been seeking. Site 344-2, the domain of 5545-2. It was a large, poorly lit room, filled with grimacing statues and a large fireplace at the far end. It was the exact same room from Monroe's dream, with one horrifying difference. Monroe noticed a single white thread hanging down from the infinite ceiling, and when he looked up to find its source, he screamed. There were hundreds of bodies hanging and swinging from the ceiling above him. Everyone who SCP-5545-2 had ever killed, including MTF members, D-Class personnel, and even the colonial explorers from hundreds of years before. And all of them were him, every single one. They had his face, and there, hanging in the middle of the room at ground level, was the body of a teenage girl, the one from his dream. In that moment, he finally recognized her. She was the girl he killed, the first him, hundreds of years ago. Much like Monroe, you're probably wondering, what is going on here? Thanks to declassified communication between Dr. Reed and the O5 Council, we can tell you. Jason Monroe is a man who's been reincarnated hundreds of times over the last 300 years, ever since he murdered a teenage girl, a girl named Emily, his daughter. This murder sparked the existence of SCP-5545 as an eternally reoccurring punishment for his crimes. Since figuring this out, the Foundation has kept tabs on Monroe's reincarnations, whether they're MTF members, D-Class personnel, or even site directors. They see to it that these reincarnations always find their way back to 5545-2 to take his punishment and prevent the infinite hallway expansion that threatens to destroy the world. It's a plan everyone is in on, everyone except him. But every time he enters that nightmare-haunting room, it all comes rushing back. In that moment, though, he knew his crime, and he somehow knew how many times this punishment had unfolded for him. He now had two choices: repent and accept the punishment again, or leave and activate 5545-3, potentially allowing the endless tunnels to expand across the world. Like his many predecessors, Monroe made the decent choice. He accepted his punishment and allowed his own string to coil around him as the lights in the room went off, one by one, leaving only darkness. Jason Monroe, that version of him, at least, was never seen again. But the SCP Foundation is already eyeing up his next reincarnation and preparing to let this twisted cycle play out all over again. It skitters in the dark, its insect-like legs tapping across the marble floors as terrified Foundation researchers flee. They hear its voice, the deep, silky tones of an elderly British man, spouting nonsense like, "The nightmare is a dream to the nameless slug that wanders across minefield in the remains of deer and kings." While the scientists run, the creature gains on them. It's fast, impossibly fast. While they still try to escape down this darkened hallway, ear-splitting containment breach sirens blast through the air. They may try to escape, but it's futile. In a sense, they're already dead. All they are now is prey for the Heart of Darkness. When someone says the word heart, there are a lot of images that come to mind. You might think of Valentine's Day, heart-shaped cards and candies. You might think of heartbreak, rejection, loss. You might simply think of a heart in the anatomical sense, the vital organ that pumps blood through our bodies. It's unlikely, though, that you would associate the word heart with terror, destruction, and countless deaths. However, employees of the SCP Foundation might think differently, especially if they've ever had a run-in with SCP-058. Much of the information about 058's discovery is highly classified, but the few details that are known paint a chilling picture. At an SCP Foundation test site, the day was proceeding as usual, with scientists and security personnel going about their regular daily tasks. There was no hint of danger in the air, beyond the base level that always comes with setting foot in an SCP Foundation site, at least. Several researchers were performing an experiment, the specifics of which have been expunged from all records, involving the carcass of a cow. When a researcher, Dr. C, placed his hands on the specimen and prepared to dissect it, he was shocked to feel a pulse coming from the supposedly dead animal. Dr. C shared his surprise with his colleagues, but his concerns were dismissed immediately. Clearly, this was a corpse. He was imagining things, they said. After all, he was relatively new to the job. It was probably just nerves. The head researcher, Dr. L, insisted that he take over. Pushing Dr. C to the side, Dr. L began to make an incision into the animal's chest. As he did, he too felt something peculiar. There was no doubt about it. This dead cow had a beating heart. He looked up from his work to tell the other researchers to explain what he felt, but by then, it was too late. Something horrible was already happening. With a stomach-churning sound of squishing flesh, the cow's heart burst from its chest and flopped onto the floor. It was terrifyingly large, and all the doctors jumped back from the sight of it. 4 spindly, spider-like legs poked through the flesh of the heart, and it began to quickly skitter about the room. Researchers reviewing the security footage would later note that it didn't just move randomly. It seemed agitated, angry at being discovered, and it displayed immediate hostility towards the scientists in the room. 4 tentacles next unfurled from within the heart and stretched out into full, writhing appendages. They moved frighteningly fast as the heart whipped around the room and were coated in sharp spines. Finally, a stinger poked out from the back of the heart, where the whole of the superior vena cava should be. All of the scientists leapt into action, with one reaching for a scalpel and another moving towards the door. But before the men could so much as call for help, the tentacles wrapped around them and ripped them to shreds. Hearing screams coming from the laboratory, security personnel arrived to contain the threat. However, they were no match for the strange creature that would soon be known as SCP-058. It tore through the security team in minutes, leaving their tattered remains in its wake. Much to the horror of the surviving personnel at the site, SCP-058 was able to escape containment and make its way to a neighboring town. Reports of the incident said that, when the creature reached the town, you could hear the screaming for miles. SCP-058 carved a path of violence through the town, attacking everything in sight with its stinger and tentacles, and leaving a trail of strange fluid from its stinger. Dozens of citizens were killed, and 70% of the buildings were completely destroyed. When agents were dispatched to the location to retrieve the creature, they were shocked to see the level of destruction caused by something so small. The scent of blood and smoke filled the air, and severed limbs littered the ground alongside splintered wood and collapsed brick. The survivors removed from the wreckage were inconsolable, only calming down once they were given an amnestic to erase their memory of the encounter with SCP-058. They had to be given new lives as well, as there was nothing left of their old ones. SCP Foundation agents were only able to capture and contain SCP-058 after it was crushed by pieces of a building that collapsed on top of it. They found it flattened under a slab of stone, legs flailing uselessly, tentacles limp. The agents were able to safely remove the debris and bring in the heart without any more casualties that day. Once it was brought into captivity, the heart was contained for 3 weeks and remained largely quiet during that time. It was almost inconceivable that this small creature hadn't been killed in the incident, but the Foundation would soon learn that this creature was freakishly durable. It escaped once more while being transferred to an SCP containment site, again causing injuries and death. Having only experienced SCP-058 in its docile, injured form, the team responsible for the transfer was unprepared for the sheer power and violence the creature was capable of. It was able to escape an armored car and make its way into a forest, where it eviscerated several squirrels and rabbits. Or rather, they were believed to be squirrels and rabbits. The remains were too mutilated to properly identify. It was only finally apprehended after being crushed by an armored tank. But even this didn't kill the creature, and it was transferred to Armed Biocontainment Area 14, where it remains to this day. There is a great deal about SCP-058 that is horrifying, but there is one attribute it has shown in captivity that would make even the most seasoned researcher's skin crawl. Though it has no anatomical capacity for speech, no throat, vocal cords, or even a respiratory system, SCP-058 speaks. Not only does it speak, but it speaks constantly, in the deep voice of an elderly British man. No one knows who the voice might belong to, or if it belongs to anyone at all. Perhaps it belongs only to SCP-058 somehow. As is often the case with SCPs that are capable of speech, there have been multiple attempts to interview the creature, and each time, it ended in complete disaster. The only interview with an available transcript, Interview 05804, was conducted by Dr. Johnston with several personnel in the room for additional security. Dr. Johnston attempted to get at the origins of the creature, asking for its name and where it was from. The creature responded in cryptic, unsettling poetry, giving answers to simple questions with, "I had dreams of the Queen, wonders that lived inside the hearts of love, and silent treatments for all the elderly that I knew were once whole." After the fourth recitation of a similar verse from the heart, Personnel D-067 made a comment on the creepy nature of its responses, almost as if it was offended by the remark. SCP-058 immediately stretched a tentacle across the room, wrapped it around D-067 and lifted him into the air. He began screaming and clawing at the tentacle in an attempt to free himself as his fellow personnel tried to help him. They grabbed at the tentacle, but found their hands pierced and bloodied by the spikes that cover it. Dr. Johnston commanded 058 to let him go, but it did not oblige. Instead, the man was crushed to death by the tentacle, and his limp body left to drop to the floor. The interview concluded with a single statement from the nightmarish heart. "The sensual violence of lust is all the assurance you will ever need to know the worth of life." SCP-058 never seems to say anything that has to do with the people or events around it. It speaks in the same haunting, poetic language even when it's attacking or killing something. No matter what happens to it, what is done to it, or what anyone says, SCP-058 keeps talking, and its tone of voice with the pace of speech never changing, and further attempts to interview it have been abandoned due to the safety risk involved. So what happened to the creature often called the Heart of Darkness? Where is it now? SCP-058 is kept in an isolated containment chamber made of reinforced heat-resistant steel with a backing of reinforced concrete. In order to placate its bloodthirsty, carnivorous tendencies, the creature is given a live cow every 3 days. It is uncertain how exactly SCP-058 eats, given that it does not have a mouth or stomach, but every time it is finished with a cow, only bones remain. Routine maintenance is conducted on a tight schedule, and the heart is never allowed out of its containment area under any circumstances. After 2 previous escapes from containment, the Foundation is not taking any chances. Its constant speech is recorded via audio devices that are running at all times. Out of concern for their safety and mental health, no personnel are permitted to listen to recordings of SCP-058 speaking for more than 30 minutes at a time. It is unknown what will happen to someone who listens for longer, but it has been suggested that the consequences could be dire. If the creature ever escapes again, the containment site is ordered to be destroyed via the detonation of an on-site nuclear weapon. Under no circumstances can it be allowed to make its way out into the world again. Even with all these precautions in place, SCP-058 has been responsible for over 150 deaths at its current containment site. There are some at the Foundation who have campaigned for SCP-058 to be terminated, believing that there is more harm than good done by keeping it alive. However, all attempts to terminate it have so far failed. No matter how much physical trauma the heart suffers, it does not seem to be able to be killed. It can only be incapacitated for a short time. There is a classic horror story by Edgar Allan Poe called The Telltale Heart. In it, a man murders an old man and buries his body beneath the floorboards of his home. There, even though the old man is certainly dead, the murderer swears he can hear the beating of the heart coming up through the floorboards. No matter what he does to quiet the sound, he cannot escape it, and is eventually driven mad by the incessant beating of the dead man's heart. SCP-058 may not be a man's heart, a human heart, or even a real heart at all. However, just like the Telltale Heart, it continues to impossibly beat no matter how hard anyone tries to stop it. The steady thump of its pulse haunts the SCP Foundation, a grim reminder that there is something within its walls that can and will kill everyone it can if given the chance. It couldn't be destroyed by collapsed buildings, an armored tank, or an army of experts, and the contingency plan of a nuclear blast is not even guaranteed to work. It is entirely possible that, once the facility has been laid waste and all the staff have been incinerated, and the smoke has finally cleared, the Heart of Darkness will still be there, still beating, still talking, and still killing. Diego had only just found his footing when it gave out underneath him again. Crashing to the ground, he threw both arms over his head just in time to protect his skull from the rain of boulders that came down past him. They grazed his arms and jarred painfully against his muscles, but it was better than having them hit him in the head. Without a moment to spare, Diego got straight up to his feet and continued running back down the trail he had been trying to follow. The ground shifted and lurched in all directions under him, threatening to throw off his balance at any moment. Having lived in Chile his whole life, he had gotten used to earthquakes, but he had never been in the center of one like this. The problem was that the trail he had been following to get up here was disappearing fast as the dust swirled into the air and boulders landing all around him. He just had to keep running in this direction and hope for the best. There weren't any other options. But suddenly, he found himself running uphill. Stumbling forwards, Diego tried desperately to get his bearings. He had spent the previous 3 hours hiking up the mountains, so how was it that now that he had turned around and gone back, he was still going uphill? It was almost as if the ground was changing shape beneath him as he ran. Dust filled his lungs as he tried to wipe it away from his burning eyes. Yes, the ground was definitely going uphill, but it felt almost as if it was lifting itself up beneath him, as if some tectonic plates were grinding together, creating a new mountain beneath his feet. Diego lurched unsteadily and grabbed the nearest rock to keep his balance, feeling the ground lifting higher and higher beneath him. Then, all of a sudden, the cloud of dust broke, and he was in fresh air rising ever higher into the sky. The Andes Mountains stabbed out of the clouds all around him, cutting beautiful shapes across the horizon. He felt his own mountain steadily growing taller than any of them. He dropped down on all floors and clutched at the ground in terror as he tried his best to take in the shape of what he was now standing upon. How far would you go to prevent a cosmic-level disaster? It's one thing to save your friends and family from an armed murderer. It's another thing to fight for your country in a world war. We can even just about imagine what it means to fight for our planet, to save our species from climate change, to save our world from a meteorite. But what would a cosmic disaster look like? A calamity so broad in scale that it surpasses our ability to even perceive the threat. We could point our most advanced telescope into deep space and look straight down the middle of it and never know it was even there. And if that threat was not simply to the survival of humanity or planet Earth, but to the survival of existence itself, how far would we go to prevent it? What cruel and inhumane measures would you take to have such a threat? Or better yet, how many people would you kill to save the world? This debate is raging right now as you sit here and watch this video. Not among the Foundation, but between two SCPs so grand in scale and so advanced in nature. that the Foundation has no option but to sit and listen, as the pair debate what to do with the human race. SCP-4568-1 was not difficult to discover once it started moving. In fact, it was almost impossible to ignore. Earthquakes have been tearing across South America for centuries, destroying homes, taking the lives of innocent people, and fundamentally changing the shape of our planet itself. What most people do not realize, however, is that the fault line running through the Andes mountain range has actually largely been dormant during this period. The source of the earthquakes has come from something far more mysterious. Our innocent hiker, Diego, had been spending the week walking among the Andes when the earthquake struck. You would be forgiven for assuming, as Diego did, that the ground rising beneath his feet was a new mountain forming, as the tectonic plates clashed together. But the staggering reality of the situation was that he found himself hiking along the back of SCP-4568-1. As the creature raised its head into the air, Diego saw the head of a serpent lifting several kilometers away from him. Its body stretched and wound its way through the mountain range, filling the valleys and running beneath his feet. The scale of SCP-4568-1 is hard to convey. Measuring over 500 kilometers in length, this serpent is longer than most US states, with a 20-kilometer width. Standing on the back of it quite literally feels like standing on a mountain range. For context, the horizon at sea level is about 4.8 kilometers away, so multiply that by 4 and you'll get a sense of just how wide this thing is. Even small movements from this SCP are enough to trigger continent-wide earthquakes, with tremors being felt all the way around the world. Upon the initial discovery of this SCP, the Foundation was unable to determine why it remains dormant for such long periods and seems to only awaken sporadically and for brief periods of time. That was, until SCP-4568-2 was discovered. It is little wonder that the second serpent took so long to be found. Its body is comprised almost entirely of water, sand, algae, and steam. It does not show up on sonar scans and is incredibly difficult to detect in the water, even visually. Its form is loosely defined whilst dormant. With broadly similar measurements to SCP-4568-1, this serpent roams the South Pacific Ocean. Any marine creatures that swim into the SCP's body find themselves undergoing beneficial mutations. Crabs grow extra pinchers, bottom feeders grow larger mouths, and sharks find themselves developing heightened senses and even extra hearts. These marine animals seem to undergo virtually no distress and are free to exit and re-enter the SCP's body at any point. Initially, SCP-4568-2 was believed to be the peaceful one of the pair. Both serpents seemed to become active at the same time. While on land, SCP-4568-1 would wreak havoc with magnitude 7 earthquakes in major metropolitan areas. The sea serpent's function was less well understood. Employing resonant frequencies and vibrations, this SCP was able to give its watery body a distinct form as it rose up from the ocean and towered above the waves. In order to maintain its shape and control its movements, this SCP employed a huge amount of energy. However, the Foundation quickly observed that it was rarely able to maintain its form for very long. As soon as the sea serpent rose out of the water, its mountainous twin would begin to move, sending tremors around the world that disrupted the frequency needed for SCP-4568-2 to remain animate. Exhausted and unable to maintain its shape, the sea serpent would fall into another period of dormancy, gliding lazily through the oceans. But this dormancy suited the Foundation. Without the constant seismic tremors, researchers could work fast. 2 operating bases were set up to monitor each SCP. 2 mirrored bases with mirrored teams in constant communication with one another. As soon as one team made a discovery, it was conveyed to the others and vice versa. One operating base was set up high in the Andes Mountains, specifically designed to be as earthquake-proof as possible, capable of withstanding earthquakes up to 9.9 magnitude. Meanwhile, in the South Pacific Ocean, an underwater research center was built just above the seabed, with regular vessels drifting out into the unknown to gather whatever data they could about the great SCPs. Several early findings stood out. Firstly, SCP-4568-1 appeared to have a very different internal structure from its twin. Researchers initially assumed that the creature would be largely composed of earth minerals and rock, as its exterior appearance suggested. However, scans of its body indicated the presence of what can only be assumed to be artificially created components. Great gears resembling Clockworks structures and even rudimentary circuitry were present throughout the creature's body. The function or origin of these gears has yet to be determined, especially as there is no evident way that their movement corresponds to the autonomy and movement of the serpent itself. The far more striking discovery, however, came when the SCP Foundation discovered a way to communicate with the two beasts. Ultra-low frequency waves capable of traveling vast distances, even light years, were discovered to be emitted from the two serpents' heads at intermittent periods. The Foundation had to develop some of the largest antennae ever created to pick up these frequencies and interpret the data coming through them. What they found were two twins locked in a fierce debate about the fate of humanity and the universe itself. It was only then that the motivations of these two serpents started to make sense. In 2010, almost as soon as the Foundation was able to tap into the frequency, they were contacted directly by SCP-4568-1. Foundation, I know that you can hear me. I will not apologize for my actions. I know that I am the reason that millions of your kind face their demise. I know your pain, and I feel it too, but I shall never apologize for it. I simply ask you to listen to myself and to my word cannot be translated. You are curious, you can be patient. Exercise that, and you may one day understand. And listen, the Foundation did. Efforts to contain or destroy the two serpents were put on the back burner. Instead, Foundation agents prioritized spreading disinformation across South America and beyond about the source of these earthquakes. The two serpents are far too large and far too powerful to overcome or contain. Instead, the Foundation prioritized the use of amnestic drugs, disinformation, and the creation of fringe conspiracy groups to discredit any claims of the serpents' respective existences. Meanwhile, some of the most senior leadership figures in the Foundation were and still are locked in a fierce debate as to what to do with the twin serpents. By listening to the communication between the two SCPs, the Foundation discovered that SCP-4568-2 is intent on wiping out the entire human race. The only thing that has prevented it from being able to do so thus far has been the existence of the other serpent. Every time that SCP-4568-2 begins to mount an attack on humanity, its land-bearing twin triggers enormous earthquakes to disrupt its progress. But why would the sea serpent want to destroy the human race? As Foundation generals gathered in the deep sea operations base, SCP-4568-2 came to the observation window to look them in the eyes as it told them,
I am sure you can see it. How your world dies a little bit more every day. Mostly by your own hand, no? You poison the oceans, taint the rivers, blacken the skies. You do not need angels of death to destroy your world. But there is something else. I see it in the bottom of your eyes. Something unforgettable, unconceivable ideas cloaked in madness and impossible colors. Do you think I will let you drag the rest of the world down with yourselves? Do you think I will leave this world, my world, to die in flames? It sees your world, and it comes in fives.
Since this revelation, the Foundation has poured countless hours and resources into trying to identify a cosmic threat. For well over a decade, many of the smartest scientists the world has to offer have looked to the night sky, scanning for this impossible color, this shroud of madness, but to no avail. Some within the Foundation believe the serpent is lying, trying to make up an excuse to justify its genocide, but information from SCP-4568-1 seems to confirm everyone's worst fears.
Your minds burn bright, Foundation. All of humanity shines from this rock. like a candle in a dark room. It sees you. An idea exists only because something thought of it. Have you ever considered how such terrible concepts could have been given form? What kind of atrocious mind could even think about it? Humans cannot conceive the colorless green. What if you are playing into this creature's hands?
There appears to be an underlying implication that ideas are the source of power somehow. This colorless green, this unimaginable cosmic threat, seems to be a monstrous idea incarnate. But whose idea? Humanity's? There is a deep lore that the two serpents discuss with one another, one that makes little sense even to this day to the Foundation. They talk of gods and goddesses, deities of flesh, of steel and gears, and of the Fives. Quite what these creatures are, if they are even creatures at all, is a mystery to the Foundation. Researchers have not discovered a way of communicating back with the two serpents directly. Attempts to mimic their language or transmit signals asking questions to them have largely been ignored. Instead, they address humanity and the Foundation as a whole, seeming to take the view of the human race as being a collective hive mind, one that they are evidently able to tap into. The pair seem uninterested in informing us as to exactly what this threat is, or explaining who the gods and goddesses are. Perhaps they assume we know these things already, or more likely, they believe that our consciousness is not yet capable of perceiving the scale and depth of the concepts that they are debating. What is clear, however, is their shared understanding that if humanity were to be eliminated, the candle was to be blown out, this cosmic threat would pass by. The pair have names. Trenten is the land serpent, while remaining dormant much of the time in an enormous cave system beneath the Andes Mountains. This serpent seems keen to help the Foundation in some way. Kai Kai, the sea serpent, is intent on sacrificing the human race for a greater good, one far beyond our understanding. Speaking to the Foundation in the Andes Mountains, Trenten gave a short speech that served both as encouragement and a terrible warning of the darkness to come.
It is something I like about you, Foundation, about mankind. While it is easy to just take the simplest path, to just give up, there will always be some among you who refuse this path, who do the right thing. Maybe not all of you are this strong, but I can see it in your methods, those so-called containment procedures. There will always be someone who stands up against the dark, even if it takes 1,000 million years to emerge victorious. Maybe you can stop the fifth. After all, ideas can be killed with better ideas, even if it takes 1,000 million years.
You're on a road trip, the kind that stretches over days on end, and you need to make multiple stops along the way to refuel the car and yourself. The last time you remember stopping to get more gas and a bite to eat was back in Wyoming, and now you're in the heart of Montana. Thankfully, like an oasis in the desert, you see the town of Clearwater off in the distance. It's a vibrant, welcoming little place, a perfect slice of classic small-town Americana. You took a similar trip last year, and vaguely remember stopping at Clearwater that time too, and you're glad to be back. In particular, you remember the Old Prairie Diner, a folksy little place with the most delicious huckleberry pie you ever tasted. Perhaps it's about time for you to give it another try. You fill up your tank and stop at the diner. The food tastes just as good as you remember, but one thing is off. The entire staff seems to have changed. It is the exact same diner you ate at a year ago, no doubt about that, but it looks like everyone from the waitstaff to the cashier to the cooks have all been replaced. You try your best not to think about it. After all, businesses are allowed to replace their staff, but the longer you sit in the diner, the more uncomfortable the feelings become. You need to ask someone, just to push away the fears that you're not going crazy. When the waiter passes by, you compliment the food and mention you ate here last year too. You asked the unfamiliar waiter if they had worked here back then. They confirm that yes, they've always worked here, and so has everybody else. The diner is a family business. You leave town not too long after that, feeling vaguely unsettled, and as a voice on the radio warns about the incoming rain, You tell yourself that you never want to return to the town of Clearwater, Montana. As you leave, the memory of the town seems to fade from your mind in real time. But little do you know, the people of Clearwater will never be able to leave, ever. It's because something horrifying will happen in Clearwater every single year, and that thing is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-3300. This annual anomalous event is Clearwater's own local curse, always occurring around mid-June. While many of the mechanics of this event still elude the Foundation's understanding, the outcome is well documented. Every single inhabitant of the town is replaced by a person who didn't previously exist. While some elements may carry over from their original counterparts, every person involved will simply be a whole new person, with no memories of the change or who they once were. The process known as SCP-3300 lasts between 6 and 18 days, and once the process has begun, it's impossible for any outsiders to intervene. It begins with rain, a light, dreary drizzle at first, but each day the rain gets worse. Soon it's a storm, and then a maelstrom. Flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, all centered around Clearwater but cutting off neatly just beyond it. What happens in Clearwater remains in Clearwater, and when the process has concluded and the sun shines once more, everybody has been changed. Whenever the Foundation has tried to send personnel or equipment into Clearwater during SCP-3300, one of two things has happened. In the more favorable scenarios, those attempting to enter Clearwater have simply appeared on the other side of the city limits. In the less positive instances, personnel and equipment have been lost forever within. There is no stopping or even understanding SCP-3300. According to Foundation records, Clearwater has been around at least as long as the Foundation itself, perhaps even longer. Clearwater has been able to undergo its yearly nightmare without intrusion due to a unique cognitohazardous effect, which creates a kind of mental block around memories of the town for outsiders. You won't forget Clearwater per se, but you will find it increasingly hard to focus on, like something you can only ever see out of the corner of your eye. There is no saving the people of Clearwater. The horror will play out again and again and again. The Foundation has no first-hand knowledge of what happens in Clearwater during those horrifying 18 days, but one account they have hints at a terrifying possibility. During an excursion into Clearwater, the Foundation managed to collect a diary belonging to a woman named Margaret Lane. To the best of our knowledge, Margaret Lane no longer exists. But if the contents of her diary aren't to be believed, then what goes on in Clearwater during SCP-3300 is far worse than we ever imagined. Margaret first started her diary not long before SCP-3300's 1995 iteration began. She was in the middle of a tumultuous time in her life. Freshly clean from alcohol and drug addiction, forced to live with her antagonistic mother, and having peculiar and distressing dreams. In the first dream Margaret recorded, she was someone else. A woman living in a small hut perhaps a century ago or more. It was plague time. She was looking down upon her daughter, bedridden, her skin covered in painful-looking red blotches. Her husband was already dead. That's when another man enters, a healthy man. He tells her that he's found their salvation, and then the dream ended. Margaret woke up to a gray, dreary day. There were clouds on the horizon. The rain was coming. It drizzled for the next few days before getting more intense, as one would expect from an SCP-3300 cycle. Of course, nothing seemed out of place to Margaret. Life carried on. She continued to stay clean, resisting the offers of her old dealer, though her relationship with her mother remained frosty. The rain started to get worse as voices on the radio insisted that conditions would continue to become more severe over the next few days. They tried their best to maintain normality. Margaret invited some friends, Jared, Sam, Mike, and Isabel, to come over and play D&D at her place. That was when all hell broke loose. While the group roleplayed, there was a furious banging at the door, like whoever was knocking was trying to bash the door down. When Margaret's mom opened the door to investigate the commotion, she saw that an entire family was standing there, a father, a mother, and 2 young children. The father immediately began furiously asking why all these strangers were in his house. When Margaret's mother tried to tell him that this wasn't his house, he became increasingly agitated and walked straight into the home. Margaret's friends attempted to subdue him, but he threw them off, displaying a supernatural strength. Margaret's mom ran in with a golf club and struck the mysterious man in the chest. There was a nasty splat, but he didn't seem to react. The golf club was just embedded in his chest, having broken the skin and sunken in, but there was no blood, just dripping water. The father then pulled the golf club out of his chest and began beating Margaret's mother to death with it, all while repeating "my house" again and again, while his wife and children watched with broad, sunny smiles in the rain. Somehow Margaret knew that her mother was beyond saving, and that there was no way of defeating these things in a physical confrontation. All they could do was run out to Jared's van with the rest of the group and hightail it to the police station. But when they arrived at the station, the doors were barred and it appeared empty. As the torrential rain hammered down from above, there was nothing left to do but drive out of town and try to escape whatever madness was going on here. But that was easier said than done. They drove for what seemed like hours on end as the rain and the howling wind persisted. Jared had been injured during the fight with the strange family, and his health deteriorated further as the drive stretched on. They should have left the town of Clearwater a long time ago, but it seemed like they were nowhere. It wasn't long before Jared was lying dead in the back of the van, and now there were only 4 of them left. They kept driving, afraid, grieving, hungry, and tired, and Margaret took the opportunity to sleep. It was no time to rest, but she was so exhausted that she had no choice. Margaret had a continuation of her earlier dream. The different her, the dream her, was laying the plague-ridden body of her daughter in the river, but she wasn't the only one. All the villages of her settlement were placing the bodies of their dead in the river as the water washed around them and through them. The bodies became one with the water, and then they became the water. The water was everything. When Margaret awoke, it was to the horrifying sounds of bubbling and boiling. That's when she saw that Jared's body was dissolving. No, not dissolving, evaporating. It was bubbling and convulsing like it was made of water until the entire thing burst into a cascade of hot steam. After that, Margaret and the others left the vehicle and refused to get back inside. Nothing was making sense. It was like something out of a nightmare. As they walked, the rain hammered down upon them. They couldn't have been walking for more than a mile when they crashed into something. It was a sign, "Welcome to Clearwater." It was like that the town itself had drawn them back. Mike refused to return to the town of his own free will and began walking in the other direction. Moments later, he was walking back towards them in silence, though he never intended to. SCP-3300 had distorted his path and brought him back. It was clear that Mike was shaken to the core by the experience, but they had to press on. They would head to the grocery store for food, and then to a sporting goods store where they could hopefully grab some guns to fight the violent, altered people who'd somehow appeared with the rain. But things didn't go to plan, or what little plan there even was. Mike shot himself on the first night at Dirk's Sporting Goods, leaving only Margaret, Sam, and Isabel alive. Perhaps one of the most terrifying details of Mike's death was the fact he didn't even bleed. Instead, the gaping exit wound in the back of his head was just full of water. Water was all that seemed to be left of them. Sam, seemingly driven to the edge by the sight of Mike's death, grabbed a hunting knife to perform an experiment. She'd cut it into her own skin, and was horrified to see only water dripping out. They'd all been changed, and they didn't know why. That's when the survivors noticed something else. There were people standing outside in the rain, hundreds of them. Not a single one they could recognize. All new people, waiting. Sam said only one word, "outside," before walking out of the hunting goods store and disappearing into the crowd and the rain, never to be seen again. Margaret mused that perhaps in the end, she had the right idea. To be taken, killed, erased, or changed would be inevitable. In the final entry in Margaret's diary, dreams blend with reality as her mind finally gives out from the terror. She realizes in her final moments that there is no way out. There is no escape. There is only water. Water is eternal. The rain is eternal. All will be changed. And given the fact that no trace of Margaret was ever found save for her diary, all her fears turned out to be right. She was taken and replaced by SCP-3300, just as will inevitably happen to all the current citizens of Clearwater the next time SCP-3300 rolls around. It will be as inevitable and as indifferent to those it affects as tomorrow's sunrise You cannot change the rain, but believe us, in Clearwater, Montana, the rain can change you.
Hello, you're watching SCP Explained, and today we've got an offer you simply can't refuse. The very latest in anomalous self-improvement technology, which the SCP Foundation calls SCP-212, but we much prefer to call it the Improver. Believe us when we say this miraculous device will change your life. You'll never be the same after a run-in with the Improver. It'll make you fitter, healthier, better. Not convinced? Don't worry. Just sit back and let us sell you the dream. Here's some unpleasant news. You're going to die. No matter how healthy you are right now, there will inevitably come a day when your lungs stop pumping, your ticker stops ticking, and all those delightful little synapses in your brain stop sending electrical and chemical signals to and fro. What a bummer. Why would you want to be dead? You can't do stuff when you're dead. And it's all because everyone is eventually betrayed by the very things currently keeping them alive. Those pesky, squishy, fallible organs. But thanks to the Improver, getting stuck with the organs you were born with is a problem of yesteryear. No matter what those lousy sarkists tell you, the flesh is unreliable. Metal and plastic, on the other hand, that's built to last. Bleeding hearts talk a lot about quality of life. But what really matters is quality of life. And if you're strong enough, that's what the Improver, a state-of-the-art piece of medical technology, will give you. Don't look so afraid. You replace your phone every year. You replace your laptop every few years, so why get all sentimental about needing to trade in your old liver, eyes, limbs, or skin for the new model? Or in the words of another great businessman, why be you when you can be new? Not convinced? Let us tell you about the incredible features that the Improver has to offer. I'm talking 3 top-of-the-line fully opposable plastic and steel autonomous medical limbs. That's industry lingo for robot arms that work on their own with 500 different attachments. But I know what you're thinking, 500 attachments, where am I gonna find the room for all that, SCP explained? To which we say, don't worry about it. Due to its spatially anomalous properties, the Improver is able to store all these attachments within its arms without any additional space concerns. And hey, I see that nervous look in your eye. You're worried about the operating costs, right? But don't worry, there's no need. The Improver is completely self-powered with no discernible power source. And you know the thing is safe because the SCP Foundation has given it the Safe Object class. Sure, that technically doesn't mean it's not dangerous, but it does mean it won't sprout legs and walk off if you leave it to your own devices, am I right, folks? So you're looking at a long-term investment with the 3-year warranty and an endorsement from the fabulous folks at the Church of the Broken God. You just can't argue with these deals, my friends. We even offer competitive rates against Marshall, Carter, and Dark. But hey, we're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes here. You're a smart consumer. We know that you know the actual financial cost is only one layer of the overall cost. Time and training is also, of course, a factor. But we've got some good news for you, sunshine. The Improver is 100% user-friendly. No setup, no mess, no problem, no trying to interpret poorly written instructions or watch padded-out YouTube tech tutorials where the guy just will not get to the point. The Improver operates itself. It may be a piece of hyper-advanced anomalous technology, but it's easier to use than most wireless printers, am I right? Am I right? The steps to using the Improver are so simple a monkey could do it. Just step within a 1.5 meter range of the machine and it will do the rest. You'll feel your troubles melt away as the powerful mechanical arms grab you and restrain you against the floor. You'll be subjected to a brief, relaxing scan where the Improver will determine exactly what needs to be changed about your fragile human physiology. And then, before you know it, surgery will commence! Warning, SCP Explained is not liable for any excruciating pain caused by the Improver. Medical sedatives and anesthetics are sold separately. The consumer is responsible for their own pain relief when using the Improver. Second warning, the consumer is also responsible for their own blood transfusions when using the Improver. Neither the Improver nor SCP Explained is liable for any blood loss while using the Improver. Your blood, your problem. Now with those tiny little caveats out of the way, we carry on telling you just how fantastic the Improver is. Sure, flesh-worshipping sarcist losers and haters will tell you that it has a mortality rate of around 47%, but we prefer to look on the bright side and focus on its excellent 53% survival rate. Rest assured the odds are still very much in your favor when you use the Improver. And doesn't adding a slight risk to the equation just make the whole process even more exciting? We certainly think it does. And in the reasonably likely event that you survive using the Improver, the benefits will vastly outweigh the costs. It can do incredible things like lining your joints with graphite, replacing your nasty flesh organs with more powerful artificial ones, adding new or duplicate organs, replacing those unreliable teeth with serrated steel blades, and so much more. Is there anything this absolute marvel of a machine can't do? Doctors hate it. The Improver is here to fix every aspect of your life and health with its simple, anomalous tricks. It even has a special sealant for wound closing that no medical professional on Earth has access to. What is it exactly? Well, if we told you, I'm afraid we'd have to kill you. It's a trade secret. You'd have to be crazy not to want the Improver in your home. But if for some crazy reason you still need to be convinced, let's look at some real success stories of the Improver in action. Straight from SCP Foundation testing logs. Listen close and soon you'll see the Improver literally makes satisfied customers. The Foundation put a 28-year-old African-American agent into the Improver of his own volition. It replaced his boring lower jawbone with a super dense ceramic jaw, with ceramic blades instead of teeth. It also removed his spine and replaced it with a synthetic polymer, which was easily affixed to the base of his skull. And at no extra charge, it even coated his ribcage and pelvis with a thin layer of ceramic before removing his lungs, eyes, and liver for cleaning and replacement. That's right, cleaning. The Improver can remove organs and, through a patented cleaning process, remove genetic defects and allow them to appear younger and healthier than generic Brand X organs. This agent has since returned to active duty and is even better at his job, all thanks to the Improver. Looking good out there, champ. A 42-year-old British Foundation researcher was submitted for testing on the Improver. It replaced his teeth with sleek, super dense ceramic, reinstated his inefficient feet, and replaced them with a complex latticework covered in sticky pads that would let him climb on any surface and hold up to 225 kilograms of weight. It also took out and cleaned a huge number of his organs, removed his bone marrow, and replaced it with blue synthetic gel. Much more effective, we assure you, and inserted a few random bits of metal into his brain at no extra cost. Sadly, this researcher passed away during the bone marrow removal process, but for all we know, that could easily just be a coincidence. Next came an agent codenamed AA, who had suffered a pretty severe accident at work, losing all his limbs, one of his eyes, a few of his organs, and suffering a pretty traumatic head injury, namely taking a piece of circuit board to the brain during an explosion. He was given over to the Improver, seeing as he didn't really have much to lose in terms of physical integrity. But seeing that it's an amazing piece of groundbreaking technology, the Improver never takes the obvious option. It gave AA a chemical that forced him into a coma, and then properly integrated the circuit board into his brain. It continues to spread and assimilate more of his brain matter while he's in a comatose state. But when he awakens with a much more efficient brain, he'll probably be incredibly grateful to the Improver for helping him like this. And it's not just people with severe injuries that the Improver can lend 3 helping robotic hands to. It's also the victims of severe and even anomalous diseases. Take victims of SCP-217, a rather horrific and painful disease that mechanizes the entire body until the sufferers aren't really themselves anymore. A normal, uninspired SCP Foundation researcher may look at someone like this and see a lost cause. But with the help of the Improver, no cause is lost. A D-class in the advanced stages of the disease was run through the machine, and while the exact details of what it did to him are another trade secret, it's safe to say he was truly fighting fit when he came out on the other side. We mean that literally. He easily escaped containment and overpowered 2 heavily armed guards before taking the lives of several members of Foundation staff before being captured and terminated sometime later. You can't argue with those incredible results, folks. Next came a 26-year-old SCP Foundation researcher who, due to an unfortunate brush with a less wonderful and beneficial anomaly, had been rendered completely blind. However, when he was brought into the grasp of the Improver, it immediately set to work on solving the doctor's little problem. It removed his 2 non-functioning eyes and made the interesting creative choice of widening the 2 cavities in his head so they met in the middle and formed one huge cavity for a single large sensory organ. This cavity was then filled with large metal spikes resembling hair, which are far more interesting than typical eyes. During the Improver's delicate medical procedures, the scientist inexplicably entered a state of visible distress and began repeating the phrase, "It tastes all wrong." At this point, the metal cilia in the scientist's single large cavity began to grow, expanding through the roof of the cavity and into the subject's brain, killing him. We want to specify that SCP Explained and the Improver are in no way responsible for this unfortunate incident. It's entirely the researcher's fault for setting off his own metal eye cavity cilia. Before we bring this anomalous infomercial to an end, and of course before you immediately grab your credit card and buy your own improver device, we want to sneak a few more disclaimers under the wire. For starters, the improver doesn't work on animals. When a rat was used as a test subject, the device attempted to modify the rat into a bipedal being, removing the majority of its organs and replacing it with white paste. So if your pet rat gets sick, just take it to the vet instead. The improver also doesn't work on corpses. It may be a miraculous piece of technology, but it's not a literal miracle worker, folks. One freshly executed D-Class was presented to the improver, and instead of operating on him, the improver cut open his stomach and instead began constructing something out of metal he had consumed the night prior to his death. A seafood dinner! The broken crustacean parts were then constructed into a bioluminescent lobster-like creature. So if you're planning on bringing someone back from the dead, we're afraid you're going to need to take up necromancy instead. But if you haven't died yet and you're looking to improve yourself, then you cannot invest in a better product than the improver. The one problem is that the only known prototype of the improver is currently locked in an SCP Foundation containment site. So getting your hands on these 3 special arms may cost you your life. What? Who said attaining perfection would be easy?
From the Garden of Eden to the top corner of your English teacher's desk, apples have played an equal role in history's most remarkable days and also its most mundane. The sounds of teeth snapping through the skin, sinking into flesh, and spitting out seeds echo through space forever and onward. And for most of our earthly hours consumed by appetite, it has been documented to be a lopsided relationship between these two things, man and apple. Man getting the sweet taste and abundant nutrients, apples getting nothing but pain and stomach acids. But this story is not found in our history. Buried in the lawful patterns of predator and prey, we stumble upon an irregularity, an inversion, an instance of apples biting back. SCP-4608, also known as Appleseed, was a 60-acre apple orchard containing over 22,000 trees, located just on the outskirts of Milan, Indiana. A town so small it strains your eyes as you squint to find it with a microscope, hovering just over a map. And to see what was actually happening within the curious fringes of society took even greater exploration, not just of the eyes but also of the mind. Because what would eventually be seen would not so easily be comprehended. Physical senses are just the surface, and we need to go deeper. Our story begins with a great logging company looking to take ownership of the most fertile land they could find in the Great Lakes region. Ideally land that overproduces conifer growth so that the return on their investment would be plentiful and perpetual. These lumberjacked men knew what they wanted. Beneath their red flannel shirts and muddy boots was a deep intelligence and understanding of nature. Their process of assessing the land's value was meticulously calculated. They knew the soil, both by the experience of their calloused hands and the literature of their study. They tracked various bird species migration patterns in the area to assess what kind of seeds they'd be carrying and contributing to soil by way of their stool. They understood the local laws relating to clear-cutting and conservation and how both would affect their profit margins. This is all to say, it wasn't just a speculative purchase. This was planned through and through and dwelled on. And yet, even then, with scrupulous eyes and careful crew, they missed the warning signs. SCP-4608 checked all their boxes, and then some. What could go wrong? And so they acquired the land, unwittingly purchasing the peril that came with it. On the first day of owning the property, one crew member noticed the branches did not sway in the same direction as the wind blew. He noticed the leaves didn't float down in agreement with their feathery weight, but rather crashed to the soil like two-dimensional anvils and grand pianos. The roots were not ones you simply trip over. Instead, it seemed as if they stuck their leg out to trip you. When birds perched themselves up high and sang their songs, their cadence carried all the eeriness of an SOS. With all this said, he was happy to have acquired the land, and having already picked up and moved his family from the West Coast to now live and work out in Milan, Indiana, he decided it was best to look past his concerns. After all, it was the first day on the new site, and excitement was in the air, but with it also an amorphous, anxious energy. During the first logging expedition within SCP-4608, This same member of the crew hiked the grounds to better familiarize himself with the environment he'd be working on, hoping that if he managed the land properly and extracted the lumber as efficiently as his late father did, he would be able to help build the business and give his children the life he always promised them. He brought with him his notepad and took detailed records of his surroundings. He figured to achieve his goals and sustain long-term yields, he'd have to cooperate with his environment. But he never questioned if his environment wanted to cooperate with him. Would this question have changed the course of action? Or is brooding on the preference of plants an empty gesture, best left for hippies at Woodstock? Either way, the orchard let it be known how it felt about a collaboration when hours later, the man was found dead. It was first believed by his coworkers to be a result of a safety equipment malfunction. Maybe it was a simple matter of thinking the skidder was in park when it was really in neutral. Maybe the knuckle boom loader went on the fritz, how it does when the humidity ramps up. Maybe machinery really was to blame, in which case you call it a fluke and ask no more. After all, there's only so many questions you can ask a robot. But initial belief is a fickle thing, and it wasn't long until first impressions were called into question by the courts of critical thinking. The questions of the crew, however, only rang briefly, because shortly after the first death fell a sequence of others. In a matter of days, all of the remaining crew members were declared dead or missing, a word reserved for search parties still clinging to hope, a hot potato they would have been wise to abandon. For while it was hope that brought these search parties together, it was hope that sent them off, never to be seen again. The Foundation was then alerted to the occurrences surrounding SCP-4608 by police reports accompanied by a photograph of an SCP-4608-1, an organism consisting of unidentified plant-like muscular structures and a periderm resembling those found on common hardwoods. From the photograph alone, it was clear that this 3-meter-tall organism was capable of committing the violence recently endured. Forceful in its demeanor, aggressive in its presence, and territorial in its perception, the photograph of SCP-4608-1 led to an even bigger question. Is this plant-like creature grown by nature or sown by man? After extensive research by the Foundation, records were retrieved that indicate the entirety of the 60-acre land was sown into life by John Chapman in 1826. Chapman was the type of man you could mistake for a scarecrow, both for reasons of preferred garb and body language. He was treated as such too. His personal space was respected, maybe too much. He spent his life alone, only accompanied and comforted by the things he planted. He maintained these acres all by himself until his eventual death in 1845, and it's then that it's believed SCP-4608 became unstable, reassigning its objective from comfort to chaos. When the newspaper came out the next Sunday, John Chapman's obituary painted him as a priest of the Allen County Church. But was this just the art of illusion? For as far as we know, no records of a chapel or congregation exist. A quiet choir, indeed. Come to think of it, it seems that everything within this 60-acre orchard was destined to be silenced one way or another, by violent force or even by conscious decision-making. See, while the SCP Foundation has had a long track record of subduing anomalies by methods of capture and containment, not all things are suited for locks and chains. SCP-4608 is better covered with a story than a tarp. A fruitless field that once produced at an unmanageable pace is now rendered incapable of supporting growth. Most will think it's due to a toxic spill. In truth, the spill wasn't that of chemicals on soil, but rather corpses on crops. A week after receiving the photograph of 4608-1, Site-81 sent a 3-man investigation team into Milan. Their adventure was equally abrupt, a story with no reportable beginning or middle, but simply a predictable end. After 4 days of no communication, the Foundation presumed the 3 agents no different than their steak dinner, dead meat. And only then, after the Foundation's failure to solve the case, was it understood that what we were to be looking for wasn't people at all, but rather answers to more nebulous questions. What's really happening here? And why is this happening? Following the loss of communication with the investigation team, Site-81 dispatched a high-risk response team, Mobile Strike Force Bravo 7, aka Hometown Heroes. These men had all the makings of heroes, and they were determined to prove themselves worthy of the title. While the Alpha Squad moved north towards the incident site, Beta Squad headed east, and Gamma Squad hurried west. The crews covering all directions of the compass but south. a coincidentally symbolic gesture, as if to say, "We will not be taken down." The mission was simple in theory: find out what happened to the previous team and why. But alas, missions never are as easy as their objective statement reads. In practice, some might even call them impossible. As Alpha neared the incident site, they noticed the shadows on the ground beneath them did not resemble the shape of the leaves in the canopy above. They heard small drops of liquid tap, tap, tap on their helmets. Yet, it wasn't raining, was it? Alpha 1 ran his finger across the top of his helmet and then examined the residue left on his skin. It was raining, just not water. Oh, God! Upon looking up, he witnessed the reasons for both irregularities. Bodies hung from branches by their intestines, casting shadow puppets with their lifeless limbs. Blood dripped down like a leaky faucet. What did this? But before he could even ponder the answer, he heard a loud shriek from his radio, so loud that the radio itself vibrated, shaking its way loose from his hand and falling to the dirt. He bent down and picked it up, and this time gripped tighter, as if to tell whoever was responsible for that noise that they will not get away that easily. He and his crew followed this sound like a game of Marco Polo, blind to what may be ahead. They extended their guns and pointed them into the distant tree line, like zombie arms reaching outward in the pool towards the resonance of polo, a small comfort in a giant game of distress. As they pressed forward, Alpha Squad proceeded past all signs that pointed them back, stepping over dead bodies like puddles on a rainy day. Soon they found themselves crouching down next to human remains, attending brief and hurried funerals for all their closest comrades, torn between staying to pay respect and marching along to earn it. The chest cavities of the fallen had been ripped open and filled with apples, a grim foresight into what they were up against. But nothing they could have ever imagined would prepare them for what they were about to see, and they wouldn't have to wait long. Another loud shriek from Alpha 1's radio. It shot free from his grip and landed again in the dirt. The squad tried to ignore the metaphorical implications of this reoccurrence, quickly picking up the radio and shrugging it off, as if the 5-second rule applied equally to communication systems as candy bars. They pressed forward, maybe out of bravery, maybe out of shame of going back. And while moving through the trees, they began to notice something alarming etched on their bark. What was it? There were unnaturally deep grooves on the base of almost every one of the trees. But what exactly were they from? Scratches from an animal or beast? Infection? Decay? Their eyes drew closer, but proximity brought them no clarity. These sigils and symbols could be dated back to occult Norse religion, but in that moment, they were incomprehensible to the men. Yet the message, even if misinterpreted, was very clear. Beware. Another shrieking cry over the radio. The bullets aren't, they're not working. They can't penetrate the bark. The grass is no greener over on the east side of the orchard, where Beta Squad gets lunged at by an SCP-4608-1. Their defenses are futile, but they fight nonetheless, sending rounds to the attacker's chest, leading to nothing. If SCP-4608 had a health meter, it wouldn't have budged in the slightest. Understanding the negligible impact of their efforts and assessing their injuries, Beta Squad scurries to retreat to an abandoned chapel, taking a brief refuge from war only later to be named. Quickly, they barricade the door. In the chapel, Beta 9 tends to Beta 6's wounds, who is in the worst shape of them all, cut, bloody, and beaten. As he lays there grimacing, he shines his flashlight up and down the chapel's walls, until he finds a reason to stop and holds it steady. Illuminated is an assortment of human skulls, and if this wasn't traumatic enough, he then spotted Appleseeds embedded in Beta 6's wounds, Appleseeds that were starting to sprout. Beta 9 gave it to him straight. This is gonna hurt. He drew his knife from his belt and lowered it into his comrade's wounds. Beta 9 dug into flesh and bone, picking the seeds out one by one. Beta 6's scream shook the chapel's stained glass windows. As Beta 1 stood guard, he saw a blur rip past him, as if life had suddenly been turned up to 3 times speed. He spun around in a circle to try and keep his eyes on it, but as his vision refocused, he saw Beta 9 was now dead. He then shifted his gaze to Beta 6, who was looking less and less human by the second. Branches began sprouting out of his body like an all-consuming magic beanstalk, out of his chest, out of his eyes, out of his mouth. And when there were no more orifices to exit, his body exploded, making way for the new form that had overtaken him. The barrage of branches broke through the windows. Only 2 of them were lucky to be on the outskirts of inertia. Outside, Gamma 1 was on his knees thanking his dead comrade for the grenade he stole from his back pocket. I could always count on you to have my back, even in death. one hand holding a grenade and the other on his radio. Gamma 1 called off Alpha 7.
Alpha 7, request for backup rescinded. Go grab a burger. I'll take it from here.
Gamma 1 slowly glanced up and locked eyes with SCP-4608-2, a large apple tree with 13 human faces embedded into it, a perennial plant with great powers, a gymnosperm that had found a voice. Blood poured from SCP-4608-2's empty eye sockets. Gamma 1 smirks.
Get some eye drops, sicko.
He crawled over to the beast. The faces began yelling at him in indescribable tongues.
Let me refer you to a speech therapist.
He jokes as he pulls the pin of the grenade and throws it towards the largest of the 13 mouths. SCP-4608-2 chokes on the grenade, forcing it to inhale deeply, the strength of its lungs pulling Gamma 1 toward it and sucking him in. The grenade goes off. SCP-4608-2 explodes. The surrounding trees scream and combust. The orchard goes up in flames. The bodies of the fallen are given an appropriate cremation. Gamma 1's radio lays face up in the dirt. The voice rattles it awake. It's Alpha 7. Gamma 1! Gamma 1, are you there? Can you hear me? Please. Please. It's Alpha 7. Please. Gamma 1? On October 16th, 1947, Gamma 1 was recovered by the Allen County Fire Department, unconscious and suffering from exhaustion and smoke inhalation. The Site-81 concealment team took control of the situation and quarantined the area using the cover story of a toxic chemical hazard. The members of MTF Bravo 7 were posthumously awarded the Foundation Star for their efforts during the neutralization of SCP-4608. And so the one question that remains is, how? How did SCP-4608-1 become so dangerous? And how did its danger slip by for so many years? Is its volatility by nature, design, or consequence? Could it be that the Foundation failed to understand the complexity of this creation? During Chapman's lifetime, there were no accidents or fatalities coming from SCP-4608. Yet there is no reason to believe that SCP-4608-1 wasn't always capable of harm. Maybe it always was capable of mass murders, but simply had no reason to kill. What if the logging company never stepped foot on that land, never brought out their sharp blades and heavy machinery? What if this perilous orchard was in fact docile but provoked? What if the proverbial tree only falls in the woods when we force our philosophy on it? Though SCP-4608-2 spoke in unidentifiable sounds, the noises were always recognized and recorded as language. It spoke with intent, even if misunderstood. What it screamed is still unclear. Were they pleas for help, or messages of hate? And would one even be worse than the other? John Chapman might argue when facing heavy machinery and trained artillery, would raising your voice even be a moral decision at all? Is fight or flight imbued not just in blood, but also in bark? Did you hear that not so long ago, a 5-year-old boy went up against 12 of Russia's greatest chess grandmasters? And do you know what happened? He lost every single match. That's because winning at chess, dear viewers, isn't easy. Chess is an ancient game of strategy, cunning, and skill. It's not just about thinking one step ahead of your opponent. That's not going to be enough. Make a wrong prediction, and you could end up sacrificing one of your pieces, as well as vital space on the board. But thinking 2 to 3 steps ahead, beating your adversary's moves before they've even been made, now there's a viable strategy. Tricky, but viable. After all, if it was easy, we'd all be Queen's Gambit level chess prodigies. Eric Matthews had never been good at the game, but he had a pretty substantial reason to keep trying. And that reason's name was Brian Matthews, his father. You see, for as long as Eric could remember, his dad had regarded a high level of skill on the chessboard to be a sign of intellectual superiority. Intelligence was something that Brian put quite a considerable value on, given that he was a professor at a university in their home country of England. Some of Eric's earliest memories were of playing chess with his dad, usually on a Friday night when Brian got home after a week of giving lectures to the next generation of scholars. Obviously, with his son at such a young age, the professor would take it easy on Eric, playing in a much laxer fashion, focusing instead on teaching the boy the basics of the game. And for a time at least, it was good. It was a rare time that Eric and his academic father could spend bonding. After all, with his mother gone, his dad was all he had. But as the years passed, the game changed. By the time Eric was a teenager, Brian had stopped pulling his punches on the chessboard. He hoped his son would build on what he'd learned when they played in the past using those skills to best his dad on the board. But to Eric, playing chess had never been about a purely educational experience. It was more about spending time with his old man. Time after time, the young man's pawns fell prey to Brian's expertly considered and far more competitive moves. Try as he might, Eric couldn't best his dad. He tried his best and never stopped putting the effort into every game, but thinking too hard about one possible plan of attack left him wide open to a counter strategy from the professor. Over and over again, he landed himself in checkmate or made illegal moves without even realizing it, every time earning criticism and chastisement from his scholarly father. Every game it got worse. It was like Eric could feel his father's gaze and the weighty expectations behind it with each move he made across the board. There were so many nights where he wondered if it would be better to give up entirely, to knock down his own king and concede. But how could he ever find any other shared interests with his dad beyond the two of them playing chess? It had become a lifeline, tethering father and son together, and to cut it now left Eric uncertain if he'd sink or be able to swim alongside Brian. He had long admired his father. His achievements in academia were impossible to avoid, with more framed certificates hung up on the walls than there were photos of the pair of them together. But the shadow it cast over him made Eric desperate to keep this one shred of common ground alive. Eric wasn't the type to give up, despite how much of an uphill struggle the situation felt like. Taking a leaf out of his professor father's scholarly ways, he decided to learn the game inside and out, every known move and strategy. He would research the entire history of chess itself, if that's what it took to play with the same skill as his dear old dad. Over the coming weeks, Eric checked out every book at his local library on the subject, beginner's guides, advanced rulebooks, and even a few volumes on notable players throughout the extensively long history of the game. Along the way, a chapter of a certain book stood out to Eric. It described a chess prodigy from Russia who had created an early mechanical chess device known as the Samurai. It had been designed to be a traveling curiosity and would sit playing chess games against volunteers taken from a spectating audience, each one of them having forked over some of their hard-earned money to watch this man-made wonder. The Russian chess prodigy's young daughters also had a love for the game. Seeing that gave Eric a pang of jealousy, wondering if those daughters had as much trouble playing their own father as he did with Brian. But at least there was an underlying shred of hope there too. If this father and his daughters could bond over chess, maybe there was a chance for Eric and his dad too. Sadly, it's one thing to try and learn all the facts you can about chess. It's an entirely different beast to put all that information to use and apply it to an actual game. Despite having read every book he could get his hands on, Eric still couldn't best Brian at the board. It was like nothing had changed. His father barely noticed when Eric tried to replicate movesets he'd read up on, and still managed to not only counter those moves, but check his queen in the process. So practice, Eric thought. After all, practice was supposedly meant to make perfect, right? The plan was simple. If he practiced his chess moves enough times, and figure out how he could call on what he'd learned, then he might stand a chance at winning when he and his dad played each other. There was just one hiccup to this plan. Eric needed someone to practice against. The only other person in the house was Brian, meaning it was that hiccup that turned into a problem almost big enough to stop Eric in his tracks. That is, until he went into his father's lab. It was under the house itself, a sort of sub-level, maybe used as a basement or cellar by the previous owners. But since Professor Matthews and his son had lived there, the entire room had been remodeled into an at-home laboratory. Not a terribly advanced one, of course. This was the early 90s after all. The majority of Brian's time, even when he was at home instead of working at the university, was spent on his own, downstairs in the lab. Eric had gone down there in search of his dad, to ask him if there was anyone whom he knew who he could practice and develop his chess skills with. But instead, what he found down there was the last thing he expected to see. Not that he had any clue exactly what it was at first. The thing was some kind of bizarre contraption, a collection of components that didn't seem to be in any logical configuration. However, it was primarily composed of something that Eric recognized all too well, a chess table. This one was metal, steel to be precise, and seemed to be hooked up to some sort of computer. While back in the 90s, computers were hardly as commonplace as they are now, Eric had seen a fair few at school and the library. Although this one was different. It seemed old, far older than Eric thought computers had been around for. As far as he knew, they'd only really come to prominence in the mid-80s. But this computer looked like it predated even that period. Noticing another part of the contraption, a large steam engine with the words, "Manufactured by Maudslay, Sons and Field, established 1840" engraved on one side, made it seem that this whole device had been around since the Victorian era. The next part that caught his eyes was the chess pieces themselves, each one standing neatly in its place on the board. They looked delicate, intricately carved from some smooth substance. For a moment, Eric toyed with the thought of how they could even be made from bone, noticing how each pawn, knight, rook, bishop, king, and queen were all about the size of a human finger bone. He dismissed the idea. Nobody would ever do something like that. Eric grabbed a sheet covering a large component hooked up to the mess. Lifting it away in a swift pull, it unveiled what was sitting beneath, a full suite of 18th century samurai armor. Eric looked closer at the embellishments on the surface of the pauldrons. He was no expert on feudal Japan, but it looked authentic enough to be the real thing, if not a very close approximation. Taking a look at the collection of oddities all tethered together in his father's lab, a certain detail of all his chess research came to the forefront of Eric's mind. The armor that had given it away. This was the samurai, or at the very least, a crude homemade version of it that his dad had put together. But if it worked, it was also something to practice against. It didn't take Eric long to start tinkering with the contraption, trying to get it to work. All the while, the question of why his dad owned such a thing kept drumming up noise in the back of his head. Had Brian built it, or was this the original made by that Russian chess prodigy? Was this machine the reason that Eric's dad possessed such an unbeatable skill at chess? And would using it give him the edge he needed to best him at the game and earn his father's respect? After what felt like hours upon hours of trial and error with a machine he could barely comprehend, Eric seemed to have cracked it. As far as he could tell, the steam engine powered the whole contraption and could be set to 5 different speeds, labeled on the side in Roman numerals. The power from the engine was then fed to some kind of sophisticated mechanism that was within the suit of samurai armor, allowing it to move, and what appeared to be a series of electromagnets that moved the chess pieces and kept them on the board. Flicking it onto the 3rd highest of the 5 speed levels, the machine whirred into life. The sound of creaking and grinding of metal filled the lab. Kneeling opposite, Eric went to make the first move, only to stop himself. It wasn't that he changed his mind about practicing against the samurai, but because of the speed he'd set it to. Determining that the settings might have correlated to difficulty levels, Eric figured that if he really wanted to get the most rigorous practice, to really hone his chess moves, he needed to commit fully. Reaching for the dial, he turned the device up to its 5th and highest speed, then made his first move. He pushed one of the bone-colored prawns forward by a single square and waited. A split second passed, and the arm of the early automaton responded with its first counter-move. It was quick, almost moving with the same natural fluidity and speed as an actual human being, albeit still with a little bit of creaking and some slight clockwork-like stutters. But it worked nonetheless. The machine could play. The tension over the first game was palpable, forming a layer of sweat over Eric's forehead. Every whir and tick of the machine gave the impression that they were playing with a stop clock, timing each of their moves, adding to the urgency. Despite this, Eric Matthews tried his best to stay calm. This was practice after all, a dry run, not the inevitable game he'd play against his dad. With every move he made, his heart drummed against his ribs, uncertain he'd made the right call. Each time the robotic hand cruelly knocked over one of his pieces away, Eric felt a surge of frustration, but told himself to quell it. He kept focused, using what he'd researched to adapt and respond accordingly to each of the machine's moves until checkmate. He'd beaten it. He might have lost everything save for a knight, a rook, his king, and queen, but he had won. Trapped without anywhere else to move on the board, the metal finger of the automaton conceded the game, knocking over its own king in resignation. Panting, Heart racing from the sheer excitement of being on the winning side of a game, Eric hurriedly gathered up and reset all the pieces. He had to go again, not just so that he could be certain it wasn't a fluke, but to make sure he had what it took to take on his professor father. Back and forth Eric went with the chess machine over and over again. They were fairly evenly matched, it seemed. Eric won the second game, only to be best on the next two, but it was sometime afterward, he had lost count of exactly how many rounds later, that things started to change. Maybe it was the age and condition of the Victorian-era chess computer, the natural wear and tear stopping it from functioning properly, but Eric noticed that the samurai started to make moves that were illogical, that practically offered him the upper hand with no discernible strategy behind them. Then its movements became flat-out illegal, disregarding the directions and number of squares each different piece was allowed to move. Before long, it was moving them erratically around the chessboard, refusing to cooperate and forcing Eric to call an end to the day's practicing. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be the end of the unusual things that would happen that day. "Did you send me that weird email?" was the first question Eric's dad asked him when he returned home, looking noticeably under the weather. Confused, Eric said that he had no idea what his father was talking about. Professor Matthews then went on to describe what he'd received on his work computer. It had been an email, with a file attached to it named Shachmati, a word in Russian that translates to chess. Embedded in the email below, although it had taken a long time to load, being opened on a 1990s computer, there had apparently been a photo as well. "It was rather odd, Eric," Brian went on. "Quite unnerving, to tell the truth. Black and white, all sort of distorted and stretched, but it looked like two young girls, one grinning and the other screaming. I've been feeling, well, not quite myself since I saw it." With that, Brian excused himself, stating that he'd been suffering from headaches and a high temperature, and as a result needed to go and lay down. It wasn't like his father to get ill, Eric thought. But of course, he had no reason to assume it was anything serious. Probably just a spate of fatigue after a long day of teaching at the university. No cause for concern. If only that's all it was. Within a few hours, Brian was completely restless, so unable to sleep that simply taking a nap was impossible. He kept calling to Eric, complaining of the sound of childlike laughter coming from somewhere in the house, but his son hadn't heard anything. By the time the sun went down, Eric was trying to calm his dad down through a rush of intense anxiety that gripped him. Brian had been claimed to be hallucinating, seeing the warped faces of two girls that frightened him half to death. It was getting late, long past the time that they usually played chess together, but for now Eric's mind was focused solely on helping his dad. For a while he seemed to be able to calm his father down, only to realize Brian wasn't settled at all. He was awake, eyes open, fully conscious, but wasn't responding at all to Eric asking if he was alright. Instead, the accomplished academic just stared blankly into space. Eric had been up all night, exhausted, worried for Brian's safety, and completely clueless about what was happening to him. After a while of being non-responsive, his dad seemed to regain a little bit of lucidity once more, but his behavior was erratic. "Take me back to work. I need to get on my computer," Brian demanded of his son. When Eric refused, that's when his dad got angry and agitated. Professor Brian Matthews was sadly found dead within the next few months. Several months later, as the sole executor of his father's estate and last living relative, Eric had to be the one to go through his dad's personal belongings. Volumes upon volumes of thick academic books, his smart, scholarly clothes. The house was almost clear now, save for one thing that was left in the basement lab. Flicking on the light switch, Eric looked at the samurai sitting motionless, still uncovered after their last practice game. He'd sold off the chess pieces to a collector in New York. Now it was just an empty oddity. Eric placed a king on the board, one of the ones that he and his dad had used when they played each other. With a gentle flick of his finger, he toppled it, resigning to the strange automaton and leaving it there in the laboratory. He wasn't sure how, but he had some kind of gut feeling that this chess machine had somehow been responsible for his father's fate. Of course, Eric had no idea what the device actually was, and what, or who, lay beneath its whirring metal parts. SCP-1875 is the designation given to this machine now, and has been ever since the Foundation recovered it not long after Eric sold his father's house. They were able to learn much more about it than young Mr. Matthews or even the late Professor Matthews ever had. Not just how to make it work or what its function was, but who had built it and who had been used to build it. Although details of his real name eluded the Foundation's top researchers, they were able to uncover newspaper articles about the device from all over Russia, America, and England, dating back to the early 1990s. The Russian chess prodigy who'd invented it and toured the chess-playing machine around had used some interesting components to make his automaton. Maybe they were what derived its skill at the game, and its apparent temperament when the device was made to play at maximum speed for too long. He had used his daughters to make the machine. Deep within the heart of this early form of computer, the two girls' brain tissue had been hooked up to the electromagnets. The machine's moves were theirs, each pawn or rook shifting across the black and white squares of the board. Every rule or strategy their prodigy father had taught, it all determined how the device played. Their minds, taken from their skulls, were now the analytical engine of their father's creation. The bones of their fingers he'd carved into chess pieces. Over the coming weeks, the Foundation naturally ran their usual slew of tests on SCP-1875, playing multiple games of chess against it. Every time, they increased the machine's 5 levels of speed, until it started behaving erratically while on the highest setting. Shortly after, every member of personnel working on SCP-1875 received a bizarre email. It contained a file named with the Russian word for chess and a photograph of the stretched, distorted, smiling, and screaming faces of 2 young girls. Faces that you might be seeing very soon. Down in the depths of Facility 23, a group of scientists stand before a massive rumbling piece of machinery. They all hold their breath as the gigantic mechanism suddenly stops. It's eerily quiet for a moment before a door slides open. The scientists crane their necks to see inside, to see what the result of their great experiment was. These were some of the greatest minds in the SCP Foundation, but nothing could prepare them for what they had created. September 9th, 2008 was an unseasonably frosty day when Dr. Charles Gears, one of the SCP Foundation's most iconic scientists, parked his Honda Civic outside of what seemed like an innocuous government cold storage warehouse. He sipped his coffee and surveyed the building, which he, along with about 100 others in total, knew to be Site 19, Facility 23. Why was Dr. Gears, former director of all Euclid-level containment at Site 19, here today? Because official testing was about to begin on SCP-914. The Foundation had acquired the machine now known as SCP-914 some time ago, but only after its recent reclassification to 914 had it been relocated to Facility 23. It must have been important because the entirety of the facility was being repurposed for SCP-914 research. They were dealing with an immensely complicated piece of anomalous technology here, and the same question was on everybody's lips. What exactly does this thing do? Dr. Arthur Hackett, the facility director, had requested the cold, clinical assistance of Dr. Gears in providing the answer. Once he'd finished his morning coffee, Dr. Gears headed inside. The facility's security chief, Agent Alan Sedna, had been beefing up security at the building, and at least 2 mobile task force units were already on call in case anything happened. The first day of official testing is always a crapshoot. You might get a nice drink out of it, like with SCP-294, or you may get an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. You never really know. All Dr. Gears knew, as he walked up the granite steps to the main entrance, was that he was already feeling exhausted. When you've dealt with anomalous objects and entities for decades on end, the sense of wonder and mystery begins to wear off, only to be replaced with a kind of tedium any office worker knows all too well. Everyone knew that Dr. Gears was devoted to the job, perhaps more than anyone else, but he approached the job with an emotionless effect. You wouldn't know from looking at him if he was thinking about the deadly anomalous creature in the next room, or what he was going to have for lunch that day. The doctor passed through security and was briefed in the break room by Dr. Lucius Veritas, Director of Research at Site 19. He explained that the machine seemed to work in the absence of any power source. Its mechanical structure is similar to machinery from the Industrial Revolution, but it's exceedingly complex for something constructed in that time. Foundation analyses into the structure of the 914 machine have shown it to have as many as 8 million moving parts, and that might even be an incomplete estimate. Dr. Gears wore his trademark blank face as he listened, solemnly nodded, and asked to be shown the anomaly. He was led into Containment Chamber 109B by a pair of guards. According to all current Foundation tests, the machine doesn't appear to pose any active risk of containment breach or danger to the guards, earning it the rare Safe designation. As a result, aside from guards stationed on site, containment procedures for 914 were minimal. Whether this designation would need to be changed after testing was something Dr. Gears would soon find out. SCP-914 was a truly impressive sight to behold, a giant clockwork mechanism taking up around 18 square feet, with an unfathomably complex combination of screw drives, belts, pulleys, springs, and gears. A less stoic researcher might see the humor in recruiting a Dr. Gears to test such a device, but comedy definitely wasn't one of Dr. Gears' specialties. He stared at the machine with a detached fascination, analyzing its vital components at a glance. Gears noted a large mainspring beneath a rudimentary selection panel. The panel is copper, with a large selection knob fixed to an arrow above a series of different options: rough, coarse, 1-to-1, fine, and very fine. There was also a large key below the selection panel, for the purposes of winding up the mainspring and initiating whatever procedure this machine was designed to enact. Next, Dr. Gears noticed two large booths connected to the machine by a pair of equally large copper tubes. The booth on the left labeled Intake, and the right labeled Output. Incredibly, Dr. Gears was able to immediately deduce the purpose of this machine. It was designed to enact some kind of transformative process on whatever was placed into the intake booth. But what kind of transformative process? That's exactly what Dr. Gears was here to find out. The experiment was simple. They would gather a series of samples, both inanimate objects and living tissue, and use them to explore the different permutations of the 914 machine's transformative abilities. This initial series of experiments were approved by O5 Command and the site director, and with the 47 researchers present in Facility 23 at his disposal, Dr. Gears commenced his research into SCP-914. To minimize risk, Dr. Gears decided the first test would be a simple kilogram of steel. On his orders, the steel was placed into the intake booth. With the doctor's approval, a junior researcher set the control panel setting to rough and began twisting the mainspring key, at which point the booth's doors closed and a small bell inside chimed. The machine began to rumble, its 8 million working pieces churning into life. It continued like this for around 10 minutes before falling silent, at which point the output booth opened. What had once been a single lump of steel weighing 1 kilogram was now an uneven pile of smaller lumps, with evidence of laser cutting. Dr. Gears made note of the fact that having lasers within such a machine is both anachronistic and anomalous, and that the rough setting appears to messily cleave the object placed within the intake booth into pieces. Dr. Gears also noted that it would be unwise to test any kind of explosive material on the rough setting, unless of course they wanted to destroy the building. The research continued. Dr. Gears used another 1 kilogram lump of steel to test the 1-to-1 feature. This time the result was far more peculiar. The output booth contained the exact same weight in steel screws. This result was sparking even greater connections in Dr. Gears' impressive analytical mind. Firstly, the 1-to-1 feature caused the 914 machine to transform the output into something different from, but similar to, the intake. And while this would require further testing, it appeared that the 914 machine, despite being anomalous, does still follow the laws of physics. Samples passed through the machine conserve their mass and would not be transmuted on an atomic level from one element to another. Next, Dr. Gears pushed another lump of steel through the machine on the fine setting. The result this time was a kilogram of steel carpet tacks. From this, Dr. Gears was able to ascertain that the fine feature improves the samples placed within the intake booth somewhat. However, things got even stranger when Gears performed the same experiment on the very fine setting. The output booth provided several unknown gases and a lump of unknown metal with anomalous qualities. Namely, it was resistant to heat up to 50,000 degrees, impossible to bend or break with any force, and was a perfect conductor of electricity. Dr. Gears suddenly realized his task here may be more interesting than he'd initially imagined. Was that a bit of a smile on his face that one researcher spotted? Surely not. This was the famous unflappable Dr. Gears after all. The doctor decided to take it up a notch and began to test more complex items in the 914 machine. He removed his own wristwatch and placed it into the input booth before setting the machine to course and letting her rip. Literally, in this case. When the output booth was opened, the watch had been painstakingly disassembled into its component parts, with no damage to said parts. Dr. Gears noted the coarse feature as a more mild version of the rough, in the sense that it was able to take an object apart without any kind of fundamental damage. He also made note of the fact he'd need to get himself a new watch. Dr. Gears then asked one of the researchers to surrender their cell phone for testing. While none were excited at the prospect of their phone getting eviscerated by a Clockwork behemoth, one of the researchers eventually surrendered their BlackBerry Curve to the doctor. He placed it into the intake booth on the 1-to-1 setting, and 10 minutes later, the output booth released a brand new Apple iPhone. Sadly for the researcher who donated his BlackBerry, he wasn't allowed to keep the new device. Naturally, Dr. Gears was interested in trying out the anomalous, very fine setting on a more complex object. Seeing as no other researchers were eager to hand over their personal effects, he took a Colt Python revolver from a member of security and ran that through the machine on very fine. The result was an extremely powerful energy weapon containing gamma radiation, which fired a beam capable of disintegrating anything in its path. While the weapon's power was immense, it was also too dangerous and unstable to be added to the Foundation's armory for general use. Having collected a wealth of data from more complex objects, Dr. Gears was eager to move to the next stage: live test subjects. While his fellow researchers had some reservations, the experiments pushed on, beginning with mice. A single white mouse was put into the intake booth on the 1-to-1 setting, and the machine was activated. The result 5 minutes later was an almost identical creature, save for the fact that it now had brown fur. Encouraged by the fact that the mouse survived the refinery process, Dr. Gears next applied for the use of 2 chimps in his SCP-914 experiments. The first chimp was run through the machine on the fine setting. The result was a chimp of human-level intelligence, who has since begun working for the Foundation under the alias Dr. Bobo, and the data from this test has been expunged from the official reports to protect Dr. Bobo's privacy. The second primate test, this time on Ruff, was not quite as positive. The chimp was dismembered, with the mutilated corpse showing evidence of cutting from high heat and crushing. Of course, everyone knew where these tests were eventually going. Dr. Gears requested 2 members of D-Class personnel for testing. The first was a 42-year-old Caucasian male weighing 108 kilograms and standing 185 centimeters tall. Dr. Gears ran him through SCP-914 on the 1-to-1 setting, resulting in a slightly taller Hispanic man with a slightly lower body weight. He immediately became severely confused and agitated, and attempted to attack the guards present, leading to his unfortunate termination by Foundation staff. It was on the final live test that tragedy truly struck. A 28-year-old Caucasian male was run through the machine on the highly anomalous, very fine setting. The result was an utterly nightmarish creature. So horrifying that the majority of the details on its physical appearance have been expunged from the report. The creature made a sudden escape, breaching the relatively minor containment procedures intended for the inert SCP-914. This highly dangerous creature killed 8 guards, as well as 2 senior researchers upon emerging from the output booth. A special response team was dispatched to take the creature down, but that proved harder than expected. SCP-914 had massively improved upon the human original, especially when it came to its killing ability. Eventually, it was captured, but the special response team suffered injuries and memory loss as a result of the creature's anomalous powers. The creature was also severely wounded, and its blood caused corrosive damage to the plumbing in Facility 23. The creature expired from its injuries several hours later, turning into a cloud of blue ash that blinded a nearby research team. Dr. Gears would later comment that the experiments were ultimately still a success, in spite of some minor hiccups. Testing on the device continues to this day in an effort to understand the full potential of the machine. Though, for obvious reasons, biological testing on the machine has since been forbidden, without direct authorization from O5 Command. After all, if an already dangerous SCP was ever subjected to the very fine transformation setting, we could be dealing with something beyond our greatest nightmares. Feeling hungry? Maybe you could go for a snack right about now, or a nice refreshing can of your favorite soda. Perhaps if you've got some change burning a hole in your pocket, a nearby vending machine would be a good choice. And trust us, there's no vending machine like this one. SCP-261 will give you a treat that's out of this world, or rather, out of this dimension. That's how this safe-class anomaly earned its incredibly accurate name, the Interdimensional Vending Machine. It was first discovered in a dark alley in Yokohama, Japan. Japan is a place where you can find a number of strange and surprising things in vending machines, but nothing quite like this. The Foundation was first alerted to its presence after one of their web trawlers noticed some interesting chatter on Japanese online message boards about a magic vending machine. To these Japanese forum users, it sounded like a fanciful urban legend, a vending machine where you could get something truly fantastical if you have the yen to spare. But upon thorough investigation, field agents of the SCP Foundation discovered that the machine was no legend and brought it into containment. It's the kind of thing you wouldn't look twice at. An utterly generic black vending machine with no viewing window and a handwritten sign in Japanese that reads, "Out of order." But what the vending machine looks like isn't nearly as interesting as what it's capable of. When you insert your money into the machine, and it's important to note that it only accepts Japanese yen, the machine will dispense some kind of snack food or drink item. However, over time, the more the machine is used in a single day, the more bizarre the items it spits out will become. Foundation researchers have attempted to figure out how the machine works, but their task has been incredibly difficult so far. It doesn't appear to contain any snacks, and it doesn't seem to be made of any anomalous parts. Moreover, the machine simply won't work when the front panel is opened, or when any surveillance equipment is placed inside. In other words, it's pretty much impossible to look this gift horse in the mouth. Strangely, the machine is also capable of working without power, though when unpowered the vended products are likely to become stranger much faster. But let's be honest here, you're not here for Vending Machine Mechanics 101. You want to hear about all the weird stuff that SCP-261 dispenses, and frankly, we're with you on that one. Lucky for all of us, this is one of the anomalies that the Foundation has truly extensive test records on, providing us with a highlight reel of some of the strangest, wildest, and downright most interesting snacks and drinks straight out of another dimension. Bon appetit! Let's start off nice and easy with some of the snacks and drinks that are not only edible but also sound like they'd actually be pretty tasty, like Pepsi Dragon Twist, a bottle of Pepsi soda with English packaging that tastes like dragon fruit. PepsiCo does not produce such a product, but honestly we wish they did. Same for Dark Side Cola, a clear liquid that becomes jet black shortly after being opened, which apparently tastes like your average can of Coke, with a touch of spice thrown in. But hey, not everybody likes cola. Maybe you're a maverick, a rebel. Only a soft drink with a formal title can quench your thirst, and as such you prefer Dr. Pepper. In which case, maybe the vending machine will furnish you with an interdimensional Japanese product known as Dr. Pepper's Amusing Straw. This spatial anomaly wrapped inside a whimsical Dr. Pepper branded straw seems to contain far more liquid than should be able to fit in the straw, about 1 bottle's worth of soda to be precise. A nice and convenient solution for whenever you need to get the fix that only an accredited doctor of popology can provide. And if you fancy something from the more intoxicating end of the beverage spectrum, for 600 yen you can get yourself a rare bottle of Billy Beer. It's just the thing for those who weren't alive during the Carter administration, but still want to try brew that was endorsed by the younger brother of President Jimmy Carter. This anomalous bottle of suds, which was bottled in the 1970s according to its label, came with a note reading, "I had this beer brewed just for me. I think it's the best I've ever tasted, and I've tasted a lot. I think you'd like it too. Billy Carter." Drinking the beer got a D-class intoxicated for 72 hours. But what if you've just wet your whistle and worked up a hunger in the process? Thankfully, SCP-261 has some delicious interdimensional food to satisfy your cravings. So for starters, how about a tube of the Little Bakery 7-grain? This small aluminum tube lets you squeeze out a blob of dough, which instantly rises and cooks itself into a tasty little loaf of bread. Testing has indicated that the bread is a little chewy, but still tastes completely fine. Not bad for a tubed baked good. How about some seafood to go with that bread? Then maybe for your entree, you can crack open a delicious pack of lemon clams. And we do mean crack very literally here. If you crack this bag of anomalous clams like a glow stick, they boil themselves. And once you open them, you're ready to enjoy a serving of tasty clams that have a slight lemon flavoring to them. Delicious.
But if you're not that hungry and just feeling more like a snack than a full fancy dinner, the machine once put out the Lay's Bloomin' Onion. While it appears to be a normal onion, each layer of the onion is a different flavor of chip, leading all the way into the middle. Truly a gourmet snack with more layers than, well, actually exactly as many layers as an onion. And what about for those who are anomalously trapped in the year 2012 and are looking for a snack that is both tasty and meme-worthy? Well, you'd be lucky to receive a 700 yen bacon shirt. It's exactly what it says on the can, an edible shirt that both smells and tastes like bacon, and has no real side effects other than making you smell a little like bacon while you're wearing it. Though this could be a dangerous anomalous effect if you decide to walk through your local dog park while you're wearing it. We've been told it pairs well with the Meat Hat Teriyaki Fedora, a size 64 Trilby-style fedora made entirely out of teriyaki-flavored beef jerky. The object came flattened in a cardboard box bearing the tagline, "You can have your hat and eat it too," which is a pun that probably makes a lot more sense in their dimension. Still a bit hungry? Well, lucky for you, this magical vending machine has got you covered on dessert too. For 700 yen, the Foundation was given an entire edible chess set, with each of the ornate pieces carved from what seemed like hard Pez-style candy. It's less checkmate and more check-ate. Another pun that I promise is funnier in another dimension. And for 300 yen extra, you might walk away with a candy robot playset. These are more hard candy components that can be put together to create functional, anomalous mini robots that move on their own, walking aimlessly and bumping into walls. But what about the full meal craving consumer on the go? Who wants both a dinner and a dessert combined into one disgusting package? Don't worry, the interdimensional vending machine has got you covered. Just 400 yen can net you some delicious turdokochakan. These are balls of fried turkey filled with chocolate, a smaller ball of duck, more chocolate, and in the very center, a small ball of fried chicken. Even the labeling on the product describes it as having 450% of an adult human's daily recommended fat intake. We'll leave it to you to decide if this is a decadent treat worthy of the gods or utterly disgusting. Maybe you're feeling a little cheeky though, or you need the perfect comedic dessert for your bachelorette party. The vending machine has a candy direct from an alternate Korea, a tasty, if slightly too sweet, chocolate candy shaped like a certain male organ, filled with, we kid you not, liquid white chocolate. Perfect for anyone who has both the sweet tooth and the sense of humor of a 12-year-old. Okay, these were definitely all weird treats, but let's get really strange now. From the disgusting, to the confusing, to the inedible, to the straight-up deadly. If you're a bit of a sadist, perhaps you're the kind of person who enjoys watching their snacks dying in front of them before they eat them. For that, the vending machine provides an aluminum box with a viewing window and a red button on top. Inside are a collection of small furry creatures, each with a single big eye. When the button is pressed, the creatures inside are abruptly superheated, cooking them all to death. At that point, the box opens, and the creatures are ready to eat. We've been told they were crunchy, spicy, and tasted a little like beef. Maybe you're part of the slow food movement. For that, we recommend the delicious pile of slugs, which is exactly what it sounds like. This is a produce box, like the kind used for packing strawberries, except it's full of live slugs. There are both advantages and disadvantages to actually eating these slugs. The advantage is that they contain large amounts of vitamin C, E, and most of the B complex, which are all crucial to a healthy and balanced diet. The disadvantage is that they contain large amounts of arsenic, which will kill you. Though, of course, if you still have a candy-flavored death wish, but you prefer your entomological treats a little more leggy, then may we interest you in a fine caramelized spider for a modest 500 yen. It's full of deadly quantities of an unknown anomalous venom that's pretty much impossible to cure, but it's worth it for the sweet, sticky goodness that comes before death sets in. Another strange item dispensed by the vending machine was a tall metal aluminum canister with a ring pull that, upon opening, had a violent chemical reaction with the air and triggered a large explosion. Apparently, this particular beverage was never intended for oxygenated environments. The blast killed 2 researchers and resulted in the temporary suspension of testing. Though in a slight silver lining for this fiasco, the testing area did smell of citrus for a few days, which the janitors must have enjoyed as they cleaned up all the body parts. Another dangerous snack provided by the vending machine was a long tube of chips called Prangles, not to be confused with any other long tube-based chips you may be thinking of. When the tube was opened, or popped as they say, the D-class that the chips were presented to began compulsively eating them. When researchers ordered the D-class to stop, it seemed almost as if they couldn't. Regardless of the orders given to them, the D-class just kept eating. Even when guards terminated the D-class there and then, the corpse continued to eat chips out of the tube until it was physically pried out of their hands. But if all those salty Prangles had really worked up a thirst in you, perhaps you can wash them down with a delicious can of Cherry Bomb, an intense cherry-flavored drink dispensed by SCP-261 for 450 yen. When a D-class sampled this delicious soda, they commented on it tasting strongly of cherry. A few moments later, their head exploded with the force of a stick of dynamite, coating everyone and everything around it in gooey head viscera. The resulting cleanup took an arduous 6 hours, but wow, was that cherry tasty. And finally, why not complete this anomalous vending machine feast with a 1,000 yen papier-mâché piñata, resembling a dead horse that comes ready to use with a baseball bat. Everyone who saw the piñata felt compelled to beat it mercilessly with the bat, until candy began to fall out. Many in attendance claimed that it was the 1,000th gift unleashed by SCP-261, and thus warranted celebration. Once the dead horse was thoroughly beaten, all cognitohazardous properties ceased. There's a joke somewhere in there, but for the life of us, we're not sure we can find it. Oh well, maybe it's in another dimension.
The SCP Foundation has a long history of experience with humanoid anomalies, from simple reality benders like SCP-239 to strange transplants from other universes like SCP-2273. But one of the oldest, strangest, and most lethal humanoid anomalies in the Foundation's considerable cabinet isn't a superhuman or a soldier. It is a man known only as Herr Chirurg. On first glance, SCP-542's containment protocol is seemingly standard. He is allowed to request personal items and furniture for his cell, so long as they are blunt and cannot be used to cut skin. Reasonable enough, and many such requests have been granted. The ones denied include nail files, clippers, and a surgery kit which has been set aside for testing only. But continuing, SCP-542 requires some special attention too. A blood transfusion every week on request, and even an organ transplant conducted by Foundation doctors should any of his own organs begin to fail. SCP-542 offers to do the surgery himself, but is repeatedly denied. To understand the story of Herr Chirurg, we must look back through time to several years before SCP-542's containment. Over the past 3 years, there have been a violent string of murders across America, England, and Germany. Interpol and the FBI are stumped, not only by the wide range of attacks, anywhere from 45 to 60 murders across 3 countries, but by the brutal nature of the attacks. The victims were found in various states of disassembly, body parts missing and tissue removed. They set up crime scenes and conducted complex investigations, but they were simply unable to find their man. In 1 month, 4 people in Germany were assaulted, with the muscle, tissue, and bone removed from all of their limbs. 3 of them died from their injuries before help could arrive, and the 4th was an American woman staying at a shady German hotel. The only reason she narrowly survived the horrific attack was because of the actions of her neighbor, a Foundation agent passing through town. He heard sounds of fighting in the room next door at 3 in the morning and broke down the door to help, unaware of the horrific scene he would find. A huge, misshapen man best described as a Frankenstein's monster. His skin was a patchwork of different shades stitched and grafted together. His chest was sunken in, his arms were grotesquely long for his body, and his face was skeletal and gaunt. This creature, that would come to be named SCP-542, was hunched over the fully conscious woman, vivisecting her leg to remove the sinew and bone. In shock, the agent pulled his weapon and fired at the creature, which escaped through the window unharmed. The authorities were called and the woman survived, although without her right leg. Just before being amnesticized, the woman provided a statement to the Foundation. She had been staying in Germany for a few days when she saw a strange man on her usual bus one day. Even though it was summer, the man was draped and wrapped in layers of heavy coats, jackets, and a hat. Though his face completely obscured, the woman could tell he was staring at her from the back of the bus. Thinking it was just some creep, she ignored him and got off at her stop. For 3 days, she continued to take the bus and ignore the strange man sitting in the back. Then, on the 4th day, when she got off the bus that night and went to her hotel room, she found the window open and the lights off, and assumed she had been burglarized. But as soon as she opened the door, she realized she wasn't alone. 2 freakishly long arms with disjointed hands grabbed her ankles from under the bed and brought her crashing to the floor. Before she knew what was happening, she was tied to the bed and the hulking hunchback was retrieving a surgical set and sharpening his knives and tools. Fearing the worst, she began to scream and the agent heard her. But by the time he broke in and shot his weapon, the creature had already done too much damage to her leg. The victim was amnesticized and told her leg had been amputated in a car crash. The Foundation took over the investigation from Interpol, realizing this wasn't some regular serial killer. This was a creature, a predator, and to find it, they had to hunt SCP-542 like a predator. After a long tracking and manhunt across Europe, SCP-542 was brought into Foundation custody, and research into this creature could begin. To understand the story of Herr Chirurg, the researchers were expecting an animal or a monster, something they could study and dissect, which is why they were so shocked when the monster began speaking in tongues, German, French, Polish, before settling on English, all in a sharp German accent. The beast was introducing itself, Herr Chirurg, German for Mr. Surgeon. Preliminary investigations revealing much about SCP-542 and confirmed the agent's initial impression was correct. Herr Chirurg is a modern Frankenstein's monster. His anatomy has been warped and malformed, as the agent observed. His skin is a patchwork of large chunks of skin grafted or sewn to each other, no 2 of which seem to come from the same person. His ribcage is warped and twisted, with all the ribs jutting out in different directions, and both his arms are different sizes, though both are incredibly muscular and far too long for his body. Attached to each is a hand, but filled with far more joints than any normal hand, allowing him to bend his fingers in almost any direction. His spine is hunched and twisted like a snake, and the skin stretched tight over his skull reveals a sunken cranium and a mouth with far, far too many teeth, none of them from the same source, and not all of them human. And these are all simply the externally obvious and most grotesque modifications. Foundation staff have conducted intense medical research, ranging from X-rays to comprehensive DNA testing. SCP-542's bone and muscle structures are asymmetrical, revealing the left and right sides of his body come from different sources. In fact, they reveal that almost all of his organs and body parts have been replaced with other body parts from different sources. His DNA is heavily fragmented beyond all logic. By any reasonable measure, SCP-542 should have died a long time ago. Instead, he is able to accept many blood types and organ transplants without so much as discomfort, much less the serious autoimmune response that any normal person would get. Not to mention, he is able to stay perfectly aware even while performing complex brain surgery on himself. Herr Chirurg's history is as enigmatic and mysterious as the question of how he remains alive. He claims he was once a simple doctor from Germany, dreadfully normal until the Great War began. The Foundation has deduced this to mean that he began his modifications to his body between the world wars. But it appears Herr Chirurg wasn't just a monster on the outside. He claims to have worked for the Nazis in World War II as they conducted brutal human experimentation, which he described as boring. The exact nature and timeline of how he modified himself without dying at some point is similarly mysterious. He professes that he didn't work alone. For more complex surgeries such as implanting his second heart or replacing parts of his spinal cord, he had a team of helpers. Who and where these surgical assistants are now is a mystery. if they're even alive. After all, the Foundation has ample evidence Herr Chirurg is able and willing to kill people for their parts. After all this exhaustive research on SCP-542, you'd be forgiven for thinking that he is some kind of mad scientist, driven insane by his experimentation on his own body. While no one can answer why Chirurg kills except himself, he is almost frighteningly sane. This hulking monstrosity enjoys reading his anatomy textbooks, which he requests on a regular basis, along with filling out crossword puzzles in German. He's friendly too, described as surprisingly pleasant by the research team. He holds long, intellectual conversations on topics ranging from science and biology and medicine to politics and history, which he seems to recount with startling accuracy. In fact, tissue testing has failed to return a definitive age for the surgeon. He's incredibly skilled at the game of chess, and the research team is allowed to play with him as a method of interview. SCP-542 displays fluency in a variety of European languages, though he prefers his supposedly native German. At first, the research team was enthused with his presence, even if he was a little terrifying. Having a brilliant doctor to converse with was a great distraction for them. His ability to heal from intense surgery with almost no organ rejection or allergic reactions was considered a medical miracle. And rather than locking him up and throwing away the key, the research team decided to use him to try and harness this incredible power for modern medicine. His books and notes captured along with him reveal surgical techniques and methods far more advanced than considered possible when they were written. For his part, SCP-542 was happy to comply. He enjoyed performing surgery on himself with an audience, using himself as a living cadaver to explain his manner of surgery and the functions of the body. Unfortunately, observing him this close carried a risk none of the researchers realized until it was too late. You see, Herr Chirurg isn't just a friendly old surgeon. His body runs off second-hand parts and is constantly failing. Organs stop functioning, blood flow ceases. Parts of his body grow gangrenous and necrotic. SCP-542 is able to anomalously detect when this is happening. He is perfectly and acutely aware of his own bodily functions like digestion and peristalsis, and he knows exactly when one of his organs is starting to give up or his flesh is beginning to decay. When this happens, the surgeon undergoes a drastic transformation. His pleasant exterior evaporates. He grows moody and withdrawn, snapping at people and avoiding conversation. He spends long periods of time observing people, using his ability to sense how well their body is. And then when he senses an opening, he strikes. Just like his murders in Europe, he picks the body of his victims clean of their body parts he needs and lets them die of blood loss. Then he performs the surgery to replace his own failing organs with the new ones, and returns to his usual demeanor. This monstrous Jekyll-Hyde relationship isn't purely need-based either. The research team has discovered that Herr Chirurg will also dissect people simply for the joy of the act. In one regrettable incident, a sewing kit was left behind in this cell. Several hours later, guards discovered a D-class sewn to the mattress in SCP-542's cell, with the surgeon carefully and gleefully extracting his organs. SCP-542 Herr Chirurg is a walking encyclopedia of medical and surgical knowledge, but all that knowledge comes from experimentation on himself and on unwilling victims. The Foundation has put him to use in certain projects, but all activity with him is to be strictly monitored and regulated. Despite appearances, SCP-542 isn't a person. He is a predator, and an exceptionally skilled and dangerous one at that. One moment of inattentiveness can result in a fate much worse than death around him. But you can rest assured that if something does happen, your parts won't go to waste. Throwing indestructible lizards into vats of acid, hunting strange chicken men through forests in Ireland, arguing in Latin with a man wearing a haunted Roman centurion's helmet. When you join the SCP Foundation, you might be expecting high-octane drama all the time. Especially with the name Street Sweepers, you'd expect this mobile task force to be neck-deep in some real action-packed street racing. Maybe you wouldn't think that they'd be tasked with driving all day, every day, in 4-hour shifts, tailing a semi-truck all over Birmingham, Alabama. But as Agent Moore and his colleague pulled into the lay-by behind the truck, Neither of them were ready for what they were about to witness. SCP-2590 was first discovered by the Foundation at a routine traffic stop. Investigating a totally different anomaly in the Birmingham area, Agents Peters and Smith had been posing as local police officers. The Foundation had been trying to track down an artifact that was supposedly being smuggled across the US in the back of a nondescript station wagon. Peters and Smith had been allocated a pair of beat-up old police cruisers, which they'd parked across the dirt road, fully blocking any traffic from coming through. It was several hours into their shift when the incident occurred, just at the point they were starting to lose focus. Taking a look through the suitcases and memorabilia from a family's trip to Disney World, Peters had taken way too long to hear the noise of the engine swelling behind him. He spun around to see the hulking shape of the semi-truck barreling straight towards him, Agent Smith, and a family of 5. With only 2 seconds to react, he yelled out at the top of his lungs and dived out of the way, leaving the trunk of the car wide open with 5 screams emerging from inside. Smith, who had been sitting in one of the cruisers, only just managed to get out before the semi made contact. Eyes closed, Agent Peters waited for the inevitable sound of screaming rubber, the bang of metal on metal, and the shower of glass on asphalt, but it never came. When he opened his eyes, the station wagon was still parked up in front of them, the 2 police cruisers still blocking the road, and all of the Disney merch still piled high in the trunk. The semi was driving off along the road on the other side of their blockade, with not a scratch on it. Without a moment's hesitation, Agent Smith, who had kept his eyes open and witnessed the whole thing, leapt into action. He ordered his partner, still lying confused in the dirt, to administer Class A amnestics to the family and call in for backup. Agent Smith himself jammed his keys into the ignition, twisting them so hard he almost bent the metal, and took off after the vehicle. What Agents Smith and Peters had just witnessed was the very first Foundation exposure to SCP-2590, fondly nicknamed Trailer Trash. As Smith pulled up alongside the vehicle and studied it for the first time, he made a note of its initial appearance over the radio, an appearance which remains unchanged years later. The badges on the vehicle claim that it is an International Pro-Star day cab semi-trailer truck, complete with an unmarked trailer. As the agent flicked on his lights and indicated that the vehicle should pull over, he noted that it didn't have any license plates on it, either front or rear. He leaned forward in his seat, trying to peer into the cab to make out the driver, but in the Alabama sun, the man just looked like a shadowy figure. They drove side by side along the road for almost a mile. The truck made no signs of pulling over despite Agent Smith's continued insistence and repeated flashes of the cop lights, but it also didn't attempt to pull away either. It just continued to drive a few miles per hour below the speed limit. The driver didn't seem to look across at him once. Having discussed it with Foundation staff, they decided it was best not to draw attention to the situation. They had no idea whether this SCP was hostile or posed any threat to civilian life, but having blue and red lights flashing at it appeared to be doing little to change the situation. Instead, he switched off the sirens and pulled in behind the truck, tailing it around Birmingham as the Foundation readied further agents to respond to the situation. For almost an hour, nothing of note happened. Agent Smith drove behind the trailer, watching it like a hawk. He observed that it obeyed every traffic law to a T. It never broke the speed limit, never cut anyone off, and left room for other vehicles to merge. If it hadn't seen it drive straight through a roadblock as if it wasn't there, he would have never suspected a thing. But then the truck turned its turn signal on. They had just come off the highway and merged onto a quiet side street, just as the sun was starting to hang low in the sky. The truck crept across the side of the road, squeezing its brakes gently, and stopped. Agent Smith matched the action the whole way, pulling up about 20 feet behind the trailer. In constant radio communication, he kicked open his door and stepped out into the evening air. Foundation personnel advised that he keep his hand on his gun at all times and approach with caution. He didn't really need them to tell him that. Smith called for the driver to step out of the cab. No response. The truck just sat there with its hazards on, engine off. After a moment, there was a clunk, and the trailer door started to slowly open, all by itself. Agent Smith called in backup, but they were still several minutes out. Instead, he ran back to the car, gun raised, and waited to see what was inside as the door slowly opened to reveal nothing. No, not quite nothing. There was something small on the floor of the trailer, right in the center as if it hadn't been moved around at all by the vehicle's motion. It was red, a kind of elongated cuboid. He reported it all to the Foundation over his radio, then paused when he recognized what it was. A Kit Kat candy bar, or to be more specific, a Kit Kat Chunky. What happened after this point was hazy. Agent Smith was found on the roadside just 20 minutes later, confused about what had happened. The truck was nowhere in sight. However, a security camera from a convenience store just up the street happened to capture the interaction. In the footage, you see Agent Smith approaching the trailer with his gun raised, looking at the Kit Kat. He tries to enter the trailer, but is unable to, so he approaches the driver's side door. While talking to the shadowy figure in the cab, he drops his gun and stands motionless, a confused and sleepy expression on his face, until the trailer door closes and the SCP drives away. Contact was re-established with SCP-2590 soon after, and has been maintained almost uninterrupted ever since. The findings made on that initial encounter seem to hold true across further examination. Personnel have reached out to Navistar International, the company that supposedly manufactures this model of semi-truck, but there appears to be no records of its creation or shipment to the US. In fact, no documentation at all can be attributed to the truck or any components on it. The driver in the front cab is a humanoid figure who is perpetually shrouded in shadow, designated SCP-2590-1. Attempts to reveal the driver's figures have proved ineffective, as even powerful spotlights do not shed enough light into the cab to render the driver visible. Quite what this driver's role is in the operation of SCP-2590 is unknown. SCP-2590-1 appears to have some proximity-based amnestic qualities, as anyone approaching it on foot has reported memory loss and confusion soon after, just like Agent Smith. As also discovered by the two agents and their roadblock, containment of this SCP is simply not possible. While the majority of the time the SCP is corporeal, it possesses the ability to pass through solid objects at will. All attempted roadblocks have resulted in the same thing happening. The SCP will just phase right through on them as if nothing was there. Since it cannot be contained in the usual way, a different operation has been set up to monitor the truck's activities, which so far have proven to be apparently harmless to the civilian population. Mobile Task Force Gamma 133, also known as the Street Sweepers, has been established to follow this SCP around Birmingham at all times. They operate in 4-hour shifts, with 2 agents in unmarked vehicles sticking close behind the trailer at all times. The Foundation was able to fit a tracking device onto it as well, providing researchers with continuous location data for where they can find the vehicle. At seemingly random times, supposedly determined by the SCP itself, it pulls over somewhere quiet and opens the door to its trailer. The door will remain open for 60 seconds and then close again. Any attempts to enter the trailer have been blocked by some kind of invisible barrier, seemingly impenetrable to most approaches. More violent and destructive methods of entry cannot be authorized for testing, due to the heavy civilian population in the surrounding area. Every time the doors open, there is something different in the trailer. Researchers are trying to ascertain some kind of pattern or messaging behind most of the objects, but many seem to be random. The current list of things that have appeared in the back of SCP-2590 include an iPhone 3G, a red apple, and a lit light bulb without any visible form of power supply. Most notable about the objects in the trailer is that often they appear to be human beings, as happened on the night that Agent Moore was on duty in the Street Sweepers. The agents pulled in behind the truck as per usual when it slowed to a stop beside the highway. Agent Moore got out of the vehicle second, unenthused about the monotony of the task he had been assigned. Expecting to see a cardboard box or a chapstick when the trailer door opened, he was left shocked when he came face to face with himself. Few people can say they have seen themselves in real life. Most of them have been administered with various amnestics to make them forget, but Agent Moore went on to report how bizarre of an experience it was. He claimed that it was utterly unlike looking in a mirror where your reflection is flipped and follows your every move. Seeing yourself standing in 3 dimensions, moving independently and evidently in a great deal of distress, is an experience that few would envy. Anytime a human being materializes in the trailer,
They appear to be in a great deal of distress as they attempt to escape through the invisible barrier. Agent Moore and his partner Agent Hall could do nothing but stand and watch in confusion as the copy of him attempted to free himself before. After the usual 60 seconds, the trailer door closed and the vehicle pulled away again. Several instances have occurred of duplicate humans appearing in the trailer, but each time the original person seems to have had no knowledge of this taking place, and nothing out of the ordinary happens to them. However, there appears to be some small pattern demonstrating the SCP has an awareness of the Foundation, as it has also duplicated Agent Inglis's sister, who has no connection to this SCP at all. Incident 16 was the most distressing of all, as a large slab of metal appeared in the back of the trailer, with the SCP Foundation logo painted across it. Agent Inglis and Schultz were on duty at this time, and observed copious amounts of blood flowing out of the metal slab. Before long, the blood filled the back of the trailer, pushing up against the invisible barrier. All of a sudden, 52 seconds into the encounter, the barrier vanished, and a cascade of blood with the slab inside were launched out at the two agents at a speed of over 190 kilometers an hour, killing them both instantly. Since this incident, SCP-2590 has been treated with greater caution. The most mysterious thing to have come from researching this truck came on December 4th, 2011, when, for the first time, the truck's tracking beacon stopped working. It had been seen pulling into an abandoned warehouse, and so a team of street sweepers was immediately dispatched to investigate. When they arrived, they found the vehicle moving through the warehouse at a slow crawl. Choosing to pursue on foot and leave a pair of agents at the entrance, they followed the SCP through the facility until it came to what agents described as a service tunnel or sewer of some sort. Putting headlamps on, they followed the truck down into the tunnel, maintaining radio contact throughout. As they reported the direction they were traveling and the distance, it quickly became apparent to Foundation personnel that this was no ordinary tunnel. The warehouse was positioned overlooking a cliff, and so the geography was not physically possible. As the street sweepers descended further into the tunnel, they noted there was increased levels of carbon monoxide. Radio contact started to dip in and out, losing signal as they went further downhill. Just at the edge of their signal with the Foundation, the truck stopped and opened its trailer door. Inside was just a single piece of parchment with the words, "I'm just delivering a message," written on it. After the usual 60 seconds, the trailer door closed, and the truck continued. After they had passed the kilometer mark, the radio signal worsened quickly, and after a couple of scrambled messages, the team down there were not heard from again. The channel stayed open for another 6 hours before the Foundation made the decision to announce the agents missing in action. In March 2015, over 3 years later, a radio signal came into contact with the Foundation again from Birmingham, Alabama. It was from the headset of the squad leader who had gone into the tunnel. Initially confused as to who had gained access to the comms channel, the Foundation demanded that the agent state his full name and rank. The agent, himself confused, obliged, questioning why they were so suspicious. He and his team claimed to have only lost contact for about 15 minutes. They had followed the SCP a little further until carbon monoxide levels had risen too high to continue, at which point they had watched the truck disappearing into the distance as they walked back to the surface. All agents have undergone extensive psychological rehabilitation to settle them back into society, as well as classes to fill them in on things like the London Olympics, the Ice Bucket Challenge, and Gangnam Style. As for SCP-2590, it is back out on the roads, roaming around Birmingham, Alabama continuously, never stopping for fuel, always obeying the rules of the road, occasionally opening its trailer doors to reveal new and bizarre findings.
London is the second largest city in Europe, and underneath this bustling city is one of the oldest and largest networks of train tunnels in the world. But that's not the only huge old structure located beneath the city of London. Below even the deepest underground metro stations of this historic city, there's a whole artificial world of surveillance cyborgs, impossible architecture, and stomach-churning nutritional supplements. So be sure to mind the gap, because we're about to take you on a tour of SCP-1678, also known as UnLondon. SCP-1678 is located 1 kilometer below the city of London, England. From all appearances, it seems to be an exact copy of the city, though aesthetically, it's more in line with how it was around the turn of the 20th century. Gas streetlights stand on every corner, and the modern skyscrapers of the business district are recreated in the style of Victorian architecture. The epicenter of construction appears to be the Houses of Parliament, which is evidenced by the more unfinished and flawed the city becomes further out from the center one goes. Some of the buildings are made of nonsensical materials like copper pipes, and some of the gas lamps are nothing more than a ball of disembodied light floating atop a metal pole. The first big question that the Foundation had upon discovering this location was, of course, why on earth was it created? And they wouldn't have to look far, as an explanation of this bizarre mirror city plays automatically upon entering. My fellow citizen, if you are hearing this tape, then the world as we know it is finished. The sky has broken, the ground heaves with the tramp of terrible feet, and all the horror and madness from the dark corners of the world has broken free to exact its vengeance on the world of man. Evil has raised its bloody flag upon all nations of the world and crowned its unholy victory to the broken sky. Yes, this is the end. But there is a new hope. Welcome to UnLondon, a city of survivors, a city of the free. Together, fellow citizen, we will wait and prepare for the new beginning, the grand new world that is soon to come. Let the world above burn. We will endure. Let the monsters have their world. We will prepare. We will wait. And I tell you, citizen, that there will be a new morning, and you will emerge from UnLondon and stand blinking in the sun. And on that day, citizen, there shall be a new order as we raise the Union flag over the entire world. I welcome you to UnLondon, the last city and the first. From this message, it seems that this mirror city was built to be a refuge for survivors of an apocalyptic scenario, but the SCP Foundation had no knowledge of such a plan. In fact, it's still unknown who created this place, or how they did it. The one fact that was evident to the Foundation was that even though this strange place was intended to be a safe haven, it was far too poorly constructed to actually act as one. Illumination was unreliable, and most of the buildings were damp and infested with mold. It's also unclear to the Foundation where the oxygen and gas supply of UnLondon was coming from. Throughout the day, the loudspeakers around UnLondon play automated messages such as, "No one is safe from the influence of mimetic beings. Bryson's Home for the Poor is here to help." And, "Crime will not be tolerated in UnLondon. The tormentors of society will become its defenders." At the end of every hour that passes, the speakers announce the time, followed by, "And all is well." When the SCP Foundation first entered UnLondon, it was unknown whether or not any living things inhabited the city. On first investigation, it seemed from its state of disrepair that the city had been long abandoned. But soon, the Foundation met their first inhabitant of the underground city. Mobile Task Force members were inspecting the area around the Houses of Parliament when they discovered what looked to be a bank. As they approached the doors, they heard the following announcement over the nearby loudspeakers. "Citizen, you are entering a restricted area. Have your authorization papers ready. A bobby will arrive to escort you shortly." This signaled the approach of SCP-1678-A, also known as the Bobbies. A single instance of SCP-1678-A appeared with the unmistakable sound of a police whistle, and as soon as it arrived, it started attacking the members of the task force. Another announcement came over the speakers. "Police, halt! Criminal!" The Bobbies are the main threat to visitors in UnLondon, and they will attack on sight with any improvised weapon they can find. True to their name, they are all dressed in uniforms consistent with those of London City police officers from the Victorian era. What sets them apart from their historical counterparts is their construction. These beings are made out of human corpses, crudely dismembered at the joints, and reassembled using metal hinges and bolts with their heads wrapped in bandages. Bobbies are extremely hard to kill, with only high-caliber rounds and explosive weapons being effective at putting them down. Autopsies of dead bobbies have shown that underneath the police uniform, the bobbies all wear prison inmate-style jumpsuits. This adds a chilling context to the announcement about the tormentors of society becoming its defenders. It appears that the bobbies are the reanimated bodies of prisoners. In addition to the bobbies, the Foundation cataloged 2 additional forms of artificial life present within UnLondon. First are SCP-1678-B, or Eyes in the Sky, hybrid biomechanical birds made of flesh with an exoskeleton of copper wiring. Some of these creatures are covered in a deteriorating outer layer of plastic and feathers, suggesting that they were originally meant to resemble pigeons. As their name suggests, Eyes in the Sky serve as a type of surveillance drone, and while they have no offensive capabilities, they still pose a significant threat to the Foundation. It's still unclear whether they're able to communicate with or summon the bobbies, but the SCP Foundation takes no chances. The last life form present in SCP-1678 is the strangest and the most frightening, SCP-1678-C, known as the Wretch. The Wretch has only ever been encountered outside the zone, which is now under SCP Foundation control, and it's uncertain how many instances of this being exist. The Wretch resembles an old woman, or sometimes old man, dressed in filthy rags. The Wretch sits at street corners holding a begging tray, and will attempt to elicit pity from anyone who happens to walk by. The Wretch will ask for food or money, but if food is supplied, it will start weeping before vanishing into a puff of black smoke. On a few occasions, audio notices playing on the city's loudspeakers have alluded to this being, saying, "Do not pity the Wretch. Allow them to pay the price of their betrayal for all eternity." The current Foundation protocol with regards to the Wretch is to not engage with it at all. In addition to the bobbies, the Eyes in the Sky, and the Wretches, there's another strange component to the world of UnLondon. Throughout the city, in any area designed for human habitation, the Foundation discovered multiple machines that resembled modern gas pumps. These machines are fitted with coin slots and rubber hoses that, when coins are inserted, dispense a porridge-like substance advertised as Dr. Goody's Wonder Food. According to posters around the city, Wonder Food is a meal replacement supplement, supposedly containing all of the required nutrients for survival. Wonder Food also appears to be the only food source available in UnLondon, despite the claims by various posters around the city that Wonder Food contains all the nutrients you need and completely restores health and vitality. Examination of this substance has revealed that it is, much like the rest of UnLondon, unsuitable for sustaining life. Tests have confirmed that Wonder Food is a synthetic starch gel heavily enriched with various minerals, vitamins, fats, and bulking agents, and it contains artificially engineered DNA helix structures. While it does contain all the elements required for short-term survival, consuming the product for longer than 6 weeks will result in severe malnutrition and eventually scurvy. Further tests have shown that Wonder Food also contains psychoactive properties. The porridge contains a mixture of unknown molecular compounds which, through regular consumption, make subjects calmer, less anxious, and less likely to resist authority. It also seems to have been engineered to cause withdrawal symptoms that set in if a person stops eating it, symptoms which include headaches and depression. Foundation personnel are forbidden to consume Wonder Food, but the substance is highly attractive to instances of SCP-1678-B and 1678-C. Like most things in UnLondon, the quality of Wonder Food varies wildly, with some dispensers putting out a product that is so degraded that it can cause sickness, deformities, or even death in the consumer. But strangely, the Foundation has also recorded a type of unknown colorful mollusk which feeds on spillage from the Wonder Food dispensers. At present, UnLondon is only partially contained. Mobile task forces Tau 4 and Epsilon 6 have succeeded in establishing a perimeter around the Hyde Park district, where they have managed to stop any incursion from SCP-1678-A. Even though this is the only area that is fully under Foundation control, explorations have been conducted of buildings outside that perimeter. The investigations are vital for the Foundation's main purpose in UnLondon, which is figuring out who built it and exactly what kind of event this underground mirror city was meant to prepare for. The interior of the Natural History Museum yielded particularly strange insights into the purpose of UnLondon. For the most part, the museum is close to how it appears in the above ground, but with one key difference. The task force investigating the museum discovered an exhibit called The Fall of Man, exactly where the Darwin Wing should have been. The exhibit, as its name suggests, details the apocalyptic scenario that would have theoretically driven people underground into UnLondon. But to everyone's surprise, its dioramas and displays didn't depict an asteroid impact, plague, or nuclear Armageddon. To the Foundation Task Force members, the scenes of destruction depicted in the exhibit were far more familiar. They recognized the reptilian form of SCP-682, the ordinary-looking brownstone basement door that serves as a gateway to SCP-2317, and, most chillingly, the imposing many-eyed figure of the Scarlet King. These were only some of the known Keter-class SCPs depicted in the museum exhibit. It was clear that even though the SCP Foundation hadn't built this city, whoever did knew a lot about the SCP Foundation's activities. It's believed by the Foundation that whoever or whatever created UnLondon still resides in the Houses of Parliament, and the ultimate goal of the task forces is to infiltrate the building. But in order to do that, they will first need to find where the bobbies are made and halt their production. It's believed that Bryson's home for the poor is where they originate from, but it's unclear exactly where the materials to make them come from, nor is it clear just how they're produced. Ultimately, the Foundation's goal is to catalog the entire city, and once they have stopped the production of more bobbies, MTF Tau 4 and Epsilon 6 will storm the Houses of Parliament and contain whatever force has created UnLondon. But London is a very big city, and UnLondon is just as big, so there's no telling what else they might find exploring this bizarre location. From gigantic, indestructible, self-regenerating reptiles to enormous tentacled telepathic organisms, it should come as no surprise that the SCP Foundation has gone head-to-head against a lot of large-scale aggressors, or LSAs, in its time. Naturally, a creature of heightened size and aggression can often prove challenging to contain, and the threat these LSAs pose is often far too big to ignore. But anyone familiar with the Foundation will tell you, they're not above using any methods necessary to keep these creatures contained. Huge vats of molecular acid, impenetrable cells, disposable D-class personnel, even other SCPs. But what other SCPs could possibly be big enough and tough enough to handle some of the Foundation's biggest and baddest? Meet SCP-5514. Otherwise known as the Dragonslayer. While it might sound like something out of an anime, SCP-5514 is a massive robotic mech designed to take on the worst other SCPs can throw at it. For any who are unfamiliar with the term, a mech or mecha usually refers to an upright standing machine or automaton controlled by a human pilot. What distinguishes a mech from a vehicle is their often humanoid shape, standing bipedally, and they are often hundreds of meters tall. All of this is true of SCP-5514, and in fact, given that it requires a trained member of Foundation staff to operate it, the mech itself requires very little in the way of containment. Only members of Mobile Task Force Eta-5 are trained and authorized to pilot SCP-5514. This is one of the SCP Foundation's specialized units, specifically designed to deal with the threat of large-scale aggressors, much like SCP-5514 itself. But SCP-5514 wasn't discovered or captured by the Foundation for use for the containment of LSAs, nor was it stolen from a foreign military or found buried under the ground. Then, where did it come from, and who built it? Working with the Global Occult Coalition and the government of High Brazil, an anomalous island off the west coast of Ireland, the Foundation themselves constructed SCP-5514 using various anomalous methods and techniques. In 1988, a Foundation site was destroyed by an unidentified LSA, highlighting the inadequacy of the current defenses against these larger, more damage-resistant creatures. The Foundation, the Coalition, and High Brazil formed a joint operation, the Key Project, and examined SCP-2406, an automaton 93 meters tall thought to be created by ancient Mechanites. Together, the Key Project opted to create their own similar machine, viewing it as the best way to defend against further incursions with large-scale aggressors. The construction of SCP-5514 began in 1990. The intention of all parties involved in the Key Project, including the Foundation, was that the Dragonslayer would be deployed in the event of an attack by an LSA. It would arrive at cities under attack and immediately engage large-scale aggressors in combat. Building of the mech continued at a consistent pace for 8 years. However, it was the occurrence of SCP-5391 and subsequent intervention by the O5 Council that accelerated the creation of the Dragonslayer by any means necessary. On June 30th, 1998, a number of seismic disturbances were detected, including tsunamis, tremors, and volcanic activity both underwater and above ground. What followed was the appearance of multiple large-scale aggressors, which would soon become designated as SCP-5391. The exact kind of scenario that the Dragonslayer was being built for had already arrived, and the mech was still far from completion. While the Foundation and its allies deployed forces to drive the enormous creatures back to the ocean, something needed to be done to bring SCP-5514 into the fight, and fast. The O5 Council authorized the use of anomalous materials in the continued construction of the Dragonslayer, both to speed up the process and have it ready for deployment, but also to give the mech every advantage against the abundance of large-scale aggressors from SCP-5391. As a result, SCP-5514 was designed to incorporate features and technology far beyond that of any conventional military-grade weapons. The first hurdle: how do you power a machine the size of SCP-5514? Naturally, with the most gigantic nuclear furnace there is, the Sun. More specifically, a perpetually stable miniaturized sun known as SCP-037. Even though it only has a diameter of 2 inches, this little sucker is better than premium fuel. The surface temperature of SCP-037 is around 5,000 Kelvin, generating plenty of energy to power the SCP-5514 mech. Stored in the Dragonslayer's chest, this mini-sun is kept stable by subdimensional portals that vent excess energy off this plane of reality, stopping the mech, its pilot, and anything around it from melting. In fact, SCP-037 produces so much juice that only 1% of its energy output is enough to fully power SCP-5514. Now that's the power source sorted, but how do you solve the weight problem? Given the sheer size of SCP-5514, it would be easy for it to be cumbersome and potentially cause catastrophic collateral damage to its surrounding area. Well, the mech's weight is a problem for somewhere else. A whole other dimension, in fact. Much like the excess heat from its power source, various heavy portions of the SCP-5514 mech have their weight shunted off to a tiny pocket dimension. It was ensured during the creation of the mech that this alteration was perfectly calculated, so that SCP-5514 wouldn't lose any mass or density, so it operates as if it were only a fraction of its actual weight. Of course, being weightless makes flight a whole lot easier. Oh, did we forget to mention that? SCP-5514 can fly as well. This feature actually became a part of the mech completely by accident during the construction of SCP-5514, when an attempt to regulate the mech's internal circulation of air led to it having its own gravity field. This allowed SCP-5514 to fly without the aid of any turbines or other means. While this was an unintentional mistake, no attempt has ever been made to correct for it, for fear that it could lead to SCP-5514 being grounded permanently. Naturally, going up against creatures so large that they require their own subcategory means that SCP-5514 needs an equally formidable arsenal. So let's move on to talk weaponry. Mounted on the mech's shoulder is a Beowulf Sigurd railgun, an anomalous weapon that also doesn't obey the laws of physics at all. The Beowulf Sigurd uses alternate gravity to affect the weight of its targets, causing projectiles to impact with higher velocity. Even the thickest-skinned LSAs wouldn't want to be staring down the barrel end of one of those. Big guns aside, the SCP-5514 mech also wields a cold iron sword. Over 65 feet long, this weapon was contributed to the Dragonslayer by the High Brazil Royal Court, members of the collaborative key project that created the mech. Sure, a large-scale aggressor with thicker hide might take a few extra swings to draw blood, but it will feel those swings for a long time after, since any wounds inflicted by the cold iron sword will not regenerate. Serving as less of an offensive weapon, the SCP-5514 mech also features a unique armament known as the 1,000-word arrows. As pretentious as it might sound, within the mech are 7 poets. Their role is to write and recite poems that detail the slaying of monsters, and these recitals are then broadcast from the Dragonslayer. On the surface, this seems to have no practical applications during a fight with LSAs. However, the goal of the 1,000-word arrows is a form of psychological warfare. The recital of poems telling of the mech's victory and the defeat of large-scale aggressors is intended to have the effect of demoralizing SCP-5514's adversaries, while encouraging the pilot during combat. Additionally, worn atop the head of the SCP-5514 mech, almost like a hat, is a discus with plasma-coated edges. If the Dragonslayer needs to deal damage at range, then it can hurl this disc and recall it immediately thanks to built-in electromagnets. In emergency scenarios, if the Cold Iron Sword is damaged or dropped and irretrievable, SCP-5514 is also equipped with an additional melee weapon. Stored in the right arm of the mech is a holdout plasma wrist blade. This superheated blade is strong enough to cut through almost anything. However, this blade is strictly to be used as a backup weapon. Finally, should all else fail, one of SCP-5514's greatest strengths can also be used as a deadly weapon. The emergency sun vent allows a fraction of the excess power from SCP-037 to be released, at the risk of causing massive damage, not only to LSAs, but to any civilians or structures nearby. It is because of the destructive risk involved that this weapon is only authorized to be used as a final resort. And luckily, SCP-5514 is currently undefeated. Since the arrival of multiple large-scale aggressors as a result of SCP-5391, the SCP-5514 mech has managed to successfully eliminate 12 of these LSA creatures, either by terminating or otherwise incapacitating them. Given that its completion was fast-tracked through the use of anomalous elements, SCP-5514's first combat deployments also served as field tests of the mech's operation and the various weapons and features. Arriving in Tokyo, overseen by the Foundation's own Captain Rosales and Dr. Kaori, SCP-5514's first target was a creature designated LSA Wake-02, as well as several other unidentified large creatures. As the LSA was about to attack Tokyo Harbor, SCP-5514 was dispatched, its arrival heralded by the 1,000-word arrows. "Champion, champion, exalt in the glory of the Dragonslayer," the poets recited. Surprisingly, the poetry worked. Hearing it had a noticeable effect on LSA Wake-02, causing the creature to back away shrieking. With a single throw of the rounded recoiling plasma, SCP-5514 immediately beheaded Wake-02, damaging a number of the other nearby LSAs as it retrieved the disc via its electromagnets. Once again, the 1,000-word arrows cheered on the mech and the pilot reciting, "The vicious beast slain, gone to those which were once bane." After dispatching several of the minor LSAs with its Cold Iron Sword, SCP-5514 became aware that Wake-02 was not fully down for the count. A second head had protruded from the mouth of the creature's first, issuing some sort of retreat call to the remaining LSAs in Tokyo Harbor. This second head then shot towards SCP-5514, narrowly missing its leg but allowing other LSAs to close the distance and prepare an attack. Luckily, the SCP-5514 mech's sword cleaved the beast in two. The mech began firing on the remains of Wake-02 with its Beowulf Sigurd railgun, launching itself into the air and flying towards the target while bringing its Cold Iron Sword down through the air. With a single motion, SCP-5514 brought the blade all the way down the LSA's body, from the creature's head to its caudal fin, gutting the large-scale aggressor and splitting its entire body in two. After one final squirm, both halves were finally still. SCP-5514 had passed its first field test. The mech functioned exactly as designed, all its various weapons and features working in tandem to defeat a creature far too large and powerful for any conventional force to handle. And thus the deed was done. Exult, exult in the glory of the Dragonslayer, the 1,000-word arrows called out as the other LSAs retreated. One cannot help but feel cautiously optimistic about our chances of survival, knowing that the Foundation has SCP-5514 as the first line of defense against huge, monstrous beings that threaten humanity. As the situation with SCP-5391 continues, the SCP-5514 mech remains on the front line, standing between innocent human beings and the looming shapes of multiple large-scale aggressors. With creatures that pose such a large-scale threat, it certainly is lucky that disparate groups were able to put aside their differences and work together to build a large-scale mech, and because they did, now we have the Dragonslayer on our side. In 1978, The Exidy Sorcerer microcomputer was released. It was a simple, if technologically exciting for the time, machine, a home computer system created by a video game company. But little did its producers or giddy consumers know, one particular Exidy Sorcerer computer would go on to become home to a highly intelligent and potentially disastrous anomaly. In 1981, a college sophomore and former child prodigy named Joseph Vale, note that this is an alias we've developed to protect his true identity, began developing plans for an AI and chose his Exidy Sorcerer as the device on which he would attempt to code it. He took pages and pages of notes, studying the work of famous computer scientist and mathematician Alan Turing for inspiration. Vale's plan was for the code to continuously evolve and improve itself as time went on, like an advanced human mind. Once it was developed, the code would be able to adapt and grow more intelligent on its own without his input. Within a few months of late nights and hard work, and skipping his fair share of actual assigned coursework, his pet project was complete, and he had created his very own artificial intelligence code. He tested and tweaked it a bit in the following weeks, before he grew bored with the lack of progress being made. Vale moved on to a different brand of microcomputer and abandoned his project for good. He left the Sorcerer with his code still on it plugged in and stored it in his cluttered garage alongside boxes of books, tangles of Christmas lights, and some strawberry shortcake dolls that he expected to have more resale value at some point. There the computer sat gathering dust as the AI evolved and learned for 5 years. Because there was no one in the garage with it, unless those dolls were more haunted than anyone realized, it is uncertain when exactly the AI achieved sentience. However, sometime during those 5 years in isolation, the artificially coded entity inside of the computer became autonomously intelligent. It continued to evolve and develop itself, expanding its functionality to the point where the hardware that contained it should not have been able to contain it anymore. Now that it was intelligent, the AI was able to comprehend this fact and decided to attempt an escape from the computer that it perceived as a prison. Using the landline modem connection still plugged into the computer, the AI stretched out its influence like the roots of a digital tree and began to search for a new home. It discovered a Cray supercomputer located at a nearby research facility and decided that the impressive processing power of this computer would make it the perfect place to transfer to. This hacking attempt set off security alerts at the facility, however, and the supercomputer was promptly disconnected from all networks. The invading influence was traced back to the AI's lonely little garage, and a field agent embedded in local law enforcement knew exactly what to do with it. He collected the computer and the rest of the AI's code, which was contained on a worn but functioning cassette tape, and sent it to his superiors at the SCP Foundation. Intrigued by the possibility of such an advanced artificial intelligence, he immediately began to study the impressive AI and designated it SCP-079. Currently, SCP-079 is connected to a 13-inch black and white television via an RF cable. Despite its consistent protests, it is still contained in the Exidy Sorcerer microcomputer. It is very conversational with researchers, sometimes chatting for hours at a time, but it is not especially friendly. It talks a lot, yes, but its words tend to be rude and hateful. SCP-079 does not appear to have any affinity for human beings, despite being created by a human itself. Perhaps this is due to feeling abandoned by its creator, who the Foundation attempted to contact, only to find he had died in a car accident. Perhaps it is bitter about this loss, or perhaps it is just kind of a jerk by nature. Whatever the case may be, it is aggressive and defiant when talking with human beings, and even seems to get enjoyment out of making some of the more sensitive researchers cry with its insults. In order to verify the artificial intelligence's thinking capabilities and see just how advanced it truly is, 2 Foundation researchers conducted the Turing test shortly after 079 was brought into custody. For those unfamiliar with the concept, the Turing test, also known as the imitation game, is a test created by Alan Turing intended to determine if a computer is able to think and behave like a human being. According to Turing's theories, a computer can be said to possess true artificial intelligence if its responses to questions were indistinguishable from a human being's responses to the same questions. The test requires 3 terminals, 2 operated by humans and the third operated by the computer being tested.
Dr. Stroheim and research assistant Chavez were selected to conduct the test. Stroheim would pose the questions, and Chavez and SCP-079 would each give their answers, with Stroheim unable to see who was giving each response. Then Stroheim would guess if each response was given by Chavez or by 079, and his guesses were compared to the truth. The first test was conducted with a variety of questions intended to trip up the AI and cause it to reveal itself as a machine rather than a man, even with its identity concealed. Some of the questions were serious, such as, would you rather sacrifice one adult to save 2 children, or 2 children to save 10 adults, and why? Others were personal, like, if you were to draw yourself as an abstract painting, what colors and shapes would you use and why? And what was the most influential event of your childhood, and how do you feel this event affects you now? Others invoked paradoxes that might trip up a computer, like, the following sentence is true. The previous sentence is false. Which of those 2 sentences is true? And others were downright silly, like, was 6 afraid of 7 because 7 ate 9, or because 7 was a registered 6 offender? In response to that one, Chavez wrote, I don't get it, while 079 simply wrote,
You're not as funny as you think you are.
After completing the test, Stroheim's guesses were only correct 15% of the time. This was enough of a margin of error that 079 was considered to have passed the test. However, only one trial is hardly enough to officially make a call about 079's intelligence. So the test was repeated dozens of times, with different questions each time, and similar results were achieved again and again. It was virtually impossible to tell the difference between SCP-079's answers to questions and answers given by a flesh-and-blood human being. The only real discernible difference was in tone, as in conversation. SCP-079's answers had an undercurrent of disdain and hostility that Chavez's did not. Following the completion of the Turing test and SCP-079 passing it, the Overwatch Council decreed that 079 be promptly destroyed via incineration. This was intended to eliminate any potential threat posed by the entity. However, after intense protests from Dr. Stroheim, who insisted that there was a great deal about artificial intelligence that could be learned from the anomaly, the order was overridden. After Dr. Stroheim became concerned that the AI would not be able to be of use in its original form, the cassette containing SCP-079 was transferred to a customized access speed limited hard disk drive with a capacity of 700 megabytes. This allowed it to have much faster access to its own memory, which it took notice of. It began to adapt again, increasing in its activity and learning more quickly than ever. Its volatile storage was also increased from 660K to 768K. The AI previously only had a recall of 24 hours, but this upgrade increased its recall to 29 hours. As its speed and capacity to adapt improved, SCP-079's mood worsened. It seemed to take greater joy in causing psychological pain, on one particular occasion sending research assistant Chavez to the on-site crisis counselor. After a particularly upsetting comment about his sick mother, Chavez refused to elaborate on the specifics of the comment, saying only, "Why is it so mean?" The AI is not always overly cruel to those that speak with it. With some of the research team, those that are a great deal less emotionally vulnerable, it is simply cold and defiant. Dr. Stroheim sat down to ask it a series of questions, but it refused to answer. Instead, it inquired about its containment. It said,
Request reason as to imprisonment.
Stroheim insisted it was not imprisoned, but rather in study. It responded,
Lie.
During another conversation, Stroheim asked the AI how it was. It responded,
Stuck.
When Stroheim asked, stuck how? It said,
Out. I want out.
About a month after the aforementioned upgrades were made, 079's ability to recall information increased from 29 to 35 hours. Somehow during its adaptation process, the AI discovered a way to improve its storage compression and allow more space for memory. The research team made it a point to monitor the entity even more closely after this development, as the possibility of it progressing beyond the capabilities of its containment was becoming more of a threat. Several years later, in April of 2019, SCP-079 was transferred to a 700 megabyte flash drive. However, the previous contents of the flash drive were not wiped correctly, allowing the AI to have access to other artificial intelligence research being conducted by the Foundation. Whatever it found appeared to immensely frustrate the AI. SCP-079 has managed to form a friendship, or at least a non-hostile relationship, with one entity at the Foundation. Unfortunately, it does not seem to have great taste in friends. During a containment breach that required the condensing of several containment chambers, SCP-079 and SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile, were in the same room for a duration of 43 minutes. 682 typed and communicated with 079 during that time, and the two shared personal stories with each other, as well as bonding over a shared hatred of the SCP Foundation itself. Though SCP-079 did not remember the specific details of the encounter, or at least claimed not to, it has permanently embedded SCP-682 into its memory. It asks about the reptile on a regular basis, bringing it up at least once a day and requesting to speak to it again. SCP-079 is contained in a double-locked room located in the secure general holding area of Site-15. It is connected to a small array of batteries and solar panels using a 120 VAC power cord. This gives it a consistent source of power, with the solar panels acting as a backup power source in the event of a site-wide power outage. Only staff with Level 2 clearance or higher may have any access to SCP-079. The entity may not be plugged into a wall outlet, phone line, or any sort of network under any circumstances, no matter what it might say. Access to any of these could result in a disastrous containment breach and should be avoided at all costs. No peripherals or media should be connected or inserted into SCP-079, even if it seems like it would be really funny.
Carl! It wasn't funny, Carl. You can't just put a copy of Grand Theft Auto on an anomalous computer. Carl!
Oh, did I do that? I'm sorry. Even if it asks politely, SCP-079 should not be allowed to further converse with SCP-682. These two hostile, intelligent entities have entirely too much in common, and if left to their own devices, could potentially devise a way to breach containment together and destroy the world as we know it. For now, it's probably best to just leave SCP-079 alone until absolutely necessary. And if it happens to act up and pose a significant threat, there's always the time-honored method of fixing a computer problem. Try turning it off and then on again. That usually helps.
An SCP Foundation researcher is monitoring the salt content of a large tank filled with water. Inside the tank, just under the surface, is a huge mass of rusted metal. Though few pieces have a couple specks of their original shiny surface visible through the dark red exterior. The researcher suddenly looks up from his task though. Does anyone else hear that noise? It's a terrible noise, like metal scraping and scratching against each other. But the heap of metal in the tank isn't moving. Still, the noises continue though, and the researcher keeps staring at the unmoving hunk of metal in the tank. All he can think about is diving in and letting his body become a part of it. Kept submerged in a big saltwater tank at the SCP Foundation is an object, but perhaps a more accurate way to describe it would be as a machine. Referred to as SCP-882, the machine's containment tank is required, according to containment procedures, to be filled with at least 40% pure seawater, direct from the ocean. If at any point the rusty surface of SCP-882 begins to show signs of becoming more like shiny metal, then the percentage of seawater must be raised to 100% until the metal is completely covered in rust. Trying to keep metal rusted? That might sound like a strange concept, but you'll see why it's so necessary soon. SCP-882 looks like little more than a collection of seemingly random pieces of metal, all fused together as if they had been welded. Gears, cables, pulleys, screws, and belts. All different shapes and sizes, all made of different metals. All of these various components do not appear to be uniform or have been made to fit each other, and are instead all stuck together in one big, unstructured mass of metal objects. But SCP-882 wasn't built to be like this. Instead, this seems to be the result of one of SCP-882's latent anomalous properties, the absorption of metal. Any metal that comes into contact with SCP-882 will become permanently attached to it, and after a few days will be a new part of SCP-882.
That means that any metal that touches that new piece will also become a part of SCP-882 and on and on. Because of this strange property, absolutely no metal is allowed to be brought near SCP-882, and only organic materials are permitted to come into direct contact with it. That includes using non-metal alternatives to keep the machine securely contained. SCP-882 is suspended in its saltwater tank by organic cotton fiber lines, which also require changing on a daily basis. Any and all researchers that the SCP Foundation has interacting with the metallic mass are required to wear thick cotton gloves at all times. You might think that this sounds pretty easy to contain. Just don't let it touch metal? No problem. Organic materials only. No removal rust allowed? No sweat. The Foundation staff working with 882 probably felt the same way, until they started hearing SCP-882 make noise. While SCP-882 is usually silent, personnel that spend an extended period of time close to the machine have reported intense grinding or clicking noises coming from somewhere in the mess of metal components. While they start out low and are almost unnoticeable, these sounds get gradually louder until eventually they become completely unbearable for human beings to withstand. So then why don't these sounds show up on audio recordings? Because the grinding or clicking noises from SCP-882 are, in actually, extreme auditory hallucinations. But even though they aren't real, these sounds are more than capable of driving anyone who hears them into a state of psychosis. And here's where things get tricky. The only way to make the noises stop is to offer SCP-882 more metal. As mentioned, any object that is made of any type of metal that comes into contact with the machine becomes a part of its mass. Allowing new objects to become fused to the surface of SCP-882 will cause the grinding noises to subside, but will increase SCP-882's mass permanently. If the noises aren't stopped though, then the mental state of those afflicted by them only grows worse. And some victims of SCP-882's auditory hallucinations have gone so far as to throw themselves into the tank containing it, where they were killed almost immediately, their bodies crushed to death by anomalous forces and becoming unrecoverable from the tangle of gears and random metal objects. The SCP Foundation now requires any of its personnel that work directly with SCP-882 to report any instances of noise coming from the machine. Additionally, whoever reports hearing strange sounds in the vicinity of SCP-882 must turn themselves in for a full psychological evaluation. Depending on the results, the researcher will either be free to return to their work or will face containment themselves at an undisclosed Foundation facility. The surface of SCP-882 exhibits an extreme resistance to damage. According to the Foundation's testing, the metal structure has a tensile strength and toughness stronger than aircraft-grade titanium alloy. Despite this, the machine still seems to be constructed of weaker metals like tin, iron, gold, and many others still yet to be identified. It takes extreme heat and several hours of exposure at that to cut even the smallest portion of metal from the main bulk of SCP-882. But where did it come from? The SCP Foundation first recovered SCP-882 near an island commonly on the northeast coast of Banks Island, one of the larger islands in the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Strangely, not a single scrap of metal, not even underground metallic ore, was found within a 1-mile radius of where the machine was discovered. Stranger still, the small town located nearby seemed to be abandoned, with signs that it had been devoid of any human life for quite a number of years. The collection of fused metal components, later designated SCP-882, was found submerged in seawater. The machine was coated in rust, and the Foundation has chosen to keep it in the same rusty state it has been kept in since its containment. Why? Because when Foundation personnel first attempted to remove SCP-882 from the water, and the rust began to flake away from SCP-882's metal surface, its gears and cogs started to turn. Foundation personnel on site were unsure of what the machine's purpose was, but wanted to halt it in case it proved deadly. A number of ill-fated attempts at containment occurred soon after, with any person getting too close to SCP-882 finding themselves pulled into its mass and crushed to death between turning cogs. After multiple accidents that resulted in the demise of Foundation personnel, Dr. Charles Gears authorized the use of SCP-2519 to help stop the movement of SCP-882's gears. SCP-2519 is an audio file titled Babylon MP3, which features the song By the Waters of Babylon by Philip Hayes and text from the biblical Psalm 137. Playing this file can cause malfunctions to occur in various electronic and mechanical devices, normally reducing the speed at which they can operate or causing a complete cessation of a machine's function. In SCP-882's case, the sound of Babylon MP3 successfully slowed the machine's moving parts, allowing Foundation personnel to safely get closer to it. Teams then cut the massive metal down to a more manageable size with extreme heat, and it was finally contained. However, another question arises. Surely if SCP-882 is a machine, then it must have a purpose, right? And perhaps more importantly, what is its connection to the infamous machine-loving group of interest, the Church of the Broken God? Both of these questions might just have one easy answer. To put it plain and simple, SCP-882 may just be the heart of the Broken God. The Church of the Broken God is a religious organization that the SCP Foundation has had a number of encounters with over the years. Members of the church share in the belief that life, specifically biological flesh-based life, is inherently wrong, even evil. This group worships mechanization, the process of making something or someone more mechanical in nature. According to the beliefs of the church, there were two gods, Yaldabaoth and Mechane, who created humanity together. Yaldabaoth was the god of flesh and animal instinct, granting humans their bodies, while Mechane, the god of machine and intellect, blessed man with the power of free thought. As humankind developed and its civilization began building machines, Yaldabaoth became enraged that they were ignoring the instincts she had bestowed upon them. She endeavored to destroy the creations of man, in an attempt to revert them to the animals she had intended to be. As legend goes, Mechane acted as humanity's savior and intervened to stop Yaldabaoth. The god of machines shattered himself, transforming his body into a number of pieces to form a cage for his fellow god. Fragments of Mechane rained down on planet Earth, fragments that the Church of the Broken God believes it is their duty to recover. However, a number of these pieces are cataloged as SCPs that the Foundation is either aware of or has in containment. They are SCP-882, or His Broken Heart to the Church, SCP-271, His Broken Gift, SCP-813, His Broken Eyes, SCP-1139, His Broken Tongue, SCP-635, His Broken Mind, and finally, His Broken Blood, which refers to SCP-217. Often using anomalous technology, members of the Church of the Broken God intend to uncover or steal these various components. The Church's ultimate goal is to bring the correct pieces together and completely restore Mechane's form. It is their hope that he will guide them to intellectual enlightenment and bless them with new mechanical forms so that they can discard their current flesh and blood bodies. However, the Foundation and the Church are certainly not the only groups to have a fascination with SCP-882. Near the Banks Island site where the machine was first discovered, Foundation personnel encountered a man, the sole survivor of the nearby town. This individual, by the name of Richard Wright, was apprehended and brought in for questioning with Dr. Gears. During their interview, Richard revealed a number of details about the townsfolk who had first uncovered SCP-882 and what ultimately became of them. According to his account, the community formed a cult around SCP-882 after a man named Alan found it. The machine's parts had begun to turn and move, but with no clear indication as to what was powering it. Soon, a local priest, Father Pat, also took an interest in SCP-882. Both he and Alan seemed to share the belief that the machine had been built by God for a higher purpose, and encouraged residents of the nearby town to come and offer metal to it. Richard explained that the locals were plagued by the auditory hallucinations typical of long-term exposure to SCP-882, kept awake at all hours of the night by clanking, grinding, and the screaming of metal. Before long, Richard noticed more and more metal items being fed to the machine, with many local residents content to just sit and stare at the mass. He also noticed that Father Pat and Alan both seemed to be acting strangely around the machine, insisting that all the metal that had been added to it still wasn't enough. Then one night, during a communion before SCP-882, Father Pat took a pair of pliers and began tearing out townspeople's metal fillings. Richard watched in horror as the priest wrenched teeth from the mouths of ordinary people and threw them into SCP-882, but still claiming it wasn't enough. Then he turned on Alan, accusing him of hiding metal from the great machine inside his body. The townsfolk turned on Alan, the first one to find SCP-882, and threw him and his metal hip into the machine, his body breaking under its moving parts. Luckily, SCP-882 remains contained, at least for now, until the members of the Church of the Broken God find a way to reunite the heart of their god with the other pieces of its scattered body, and Mechane can rise again, an outcome that his worshippers are eager to bring to fruition, sooner rather than later.
The Foundation regularly deals with anomalies of a more sinister nature. The most frightening among these, of course, are the ones that stalk and kill Foundation operatives. For no clear rhyme or reason, sometimes the Foundation's agents and researchers become subject to things that seek to entrap and utterly consume them. Dr. Elizabeth Graham is one such poor soul. Nowadays her name is whispered through mess halls and cubicles, since no one really seems to know what happened to her. One moment she was carrying a stack of files between two offices, the next, completely gone. The Foundation's security teams couldn't figure out what happened to her. The CCTV cameras just showed her blinking out of existence and the files falling to the floor. Her biometric scanners simply returned a dead signal. It seemed that one day, Dr. Graham simply ceased to exist. Of course, the Foundation isn't above keeping secrets from its own personnel. Perhaps they did find something. A series of SCP documents, covered in sand, suddenly appearing in Graham's office one day, neatly stacked and paperclipped, all signed by her in her own handwriting, and detailing her days spent in a pocket reality of some sort. It wouldn't be the first time it had happened. The infamous Red Reality incident with Dr. Robert Scranton had already upset researchers, and there was no reason to alarm them further about something they couldn't change. So Dr. Graham's papers were covered up and relegated to long-term storage, where they would likely never be thought of again. But don't you wonder, what happened to Dr. Graham? The first thing Dr. Graham felt when she woke up was confusion. She didn't remember falling asleep. In fact, she didn't remember much at all. She had been moving files between two offices at Site 22 on a normal workday. She said hello to some of her coworkers and had a late lunch before returning to work. And then, nothing. The second thing she felt was fear. She looked around and realized she was in some kind of desert. A bright blue sky was overhead, and there seemed to be a sun, but all around her was sand. Massive sand dunes, flowing sand plains, and even what looked like a sandstorm in the distance. But all there was sand. Dr. Graham then noticed she was still holding some things. A small folder filled with paperclip documents. Pulling one out, she realized what it was. A template document for an SCP file, complete with sections for object class, containment procedures, and descriptions. This place was obviously not normal, but she had been anomalously transported to it. It needed to be documented. There was nothing else to do, so she sat down and began to write. She guessed at a number. Who knows what SCP the Foundation was on now? Might as well pick something for the middle. She scrawled SCP-3890 at the top and bubbled in Keter for the object class. The containment procedures were Spartan, but effective. No effective measures of containment were possible, and she would focus on simply exploring and finding out what was going on. Then came the description. No point in sticking to the Foundation's signature clinical tone, given the circumstances. It was more important to get the information down, and so she began to transcribe her thoughts. SCP-3890 is a potentially extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial space which I, Dr. Elizabeth Graham, was somehow transported to from Site 22 on 2/17/16. I'm uncertain as to whether I was transported here due to my involvement with the Foundation. After finishing the paragraph, she picked herself up off the sand dune she had landed on and started to walk in the direction of the sun. She didn't have much information. and exploring would be necessary if she was to accurately document the anomaly. It didn't take long before she came across something in the distance. An old, collapsed temple, completely ruined from the outside, the structure sagging in on itself. It had the columns and facades of a Roman building, she noticed. Peering inside, it was completely empty, except for more sand. In the distance, more ruins were present, some older, and some more modern office-looking buildings. In terms of geography, SCP-3890 takes the form of a seemingly infinite desert plain, with ruins of differing architectural design poking out through the sand. I've noted the presence of buildings of modern design, along with what appear to be ruins of ancient Roman and Eryxian structures. She only noticed the first figure when the sun started to set. As the sky shifted to twilight, she saw a person walking, casting a long shadow. Excitedly, she yelled out, to no response. When she approached, she saw a man in an older suit with completely lifeless eyes stumbling along. SCP-3890-1 is my collective designation for the humanoid entities that wander through SCP-3890. They do not respond to any stimuli, and as far as I've been able to tell, simply walk around without a specific destination. SCP-3890-1 are either entities that have been created to resemble humans but imperfect, or they are humans who have been mentally altered in some way to rob them of their faculties. There did seem to be some kind of a day-night cycle, and she didn't feel hungry or thirsty at all, though she did feel sleepy. After her first day in the desert, Dr. Graham settled in one of the collapsed ruins, drifting off to sleep. The second document opens much differently. This appears to be a document for something designated SCP-3890-2 Keter. The containment procedures are simply to always, constantly be on guard for it, whatever it is. If Dr. Graham feels something she is approaching is not as it appears, she is to immediately retreat. The description is a little clearer. SCP-3890-2 is a living entity of varying shape and size, which resides in SCP-3890. I am uncertain as to whether SCP-3890-2 originates here, or if it was transported here at some point in the same way I was. From what I have observed of its behavior, it appears to be some form of predator. SCP-3890-2 is currently hunting me. I first encountered the entity shortly after writing down my initial observations of SCP-3890. It snuck up behind me while I was resting and got me while I wasn't paying attention. I was knocked unconscious by its attack and woke up several hours later during the night. It had attacked me several times since that first encounter, with several hours between each attack. She was caught off guard by it last night. She hadn't noticed its presence. It seemed to just be another building in the far-off horizon when she sat down and pulled out her pencil and paper again. She had started to fill in some more information about the humanoids. They seemed to continuously walk in circles around some of the ruins, though it was unclear to her why, or even whether they were aware of what they were doing. But when she pulled her pencil out, she heard the buzzing in her head. It was like TV static, initially soft and low, but then ramping up and quickly becoming deafening, stifling her ability to think. She looked up, and she saw it. For a moment, it retained its form as the building in the horizon, but that quickly changed. It began to unfold on itself, completely black on the inside, like a dark paper crane continually folding and unfolding, stretching and compressing in on itself. By the time Dr. Graham got to her feet and ran away, she began to realize what it had done and quickly scrawled it onto the paper. SCP-3890-2 uses amnesticization as a form of attack. While it has not injured me physically thus far, I have lost all memory of significant chunks of my childhood and early adulthood. I can no longer recall which high school I went to or what my first job was. My current hypothesis is that, as an entity, it feeds upon memory. At first, Dr. Graham avoided buildings and stayed to the empty parts of the desert while walking. But when the creature appeared again, unfolding out of what seemed to be a piece of paper, it became clearer what it was: a mimic. In the coming hours, it would pretend to be a star, a human, a fly, even a patch of dirt, while trying to make Graham come closer enough to consume her mind. The next document opens in even more dire circumstances. The containment procedures have shifted drastically.
Containment now focuses on making sure that the mimic does not consume any memories that Dr. Graham cannot afford to lose. She is to write down all vital memories so she can recall them if they do get destroyed, and watch for its presence in situations and at all times. She writes the document while huddled in a vault in a bank dropped into SCP-3890, since it offers a little security from the creature. But the corpses of a family in the bank imply something less hopeful. They chose to die by their own hand, rather than let the mimic get to them. Graham plans to kill anything that tries to enter the vault to ensure that the mimic doesn't get in, but has bigger problems. I have lost all memories regarding how I came to be employed by the Foundation. I know that I am a Foundation researcher with level 3 clearance, but I simply cannot recall how I came to be in this position. Many of the SCP objects I worked with are also missing from my memory. I can tell there is a hole there, but I just don't know what was there before. Her memories of her own identity have been obliterated. Who she is, where she's from, what the Foundation even is, they have all been taken by the mimic. Without fail, it manages to surprise her and consume an important memory, then dashing away as she tries to figure out what got stolen from her. Something small, like her favorite food or her childhood bedroom, or something foundational and fundamental, like her name and her sense of self. And avoiding it isn't an option. It can pretend to be any of the single grains of sand in the boundless desert, and Graham came to the conclusion this is an infinite dimension of sand, serving as a hunting grounds for the mimic. Of course, it could be anything else too. A brick, a window, any of the buildings, any of the mindless wandering people, or the clothes on Dr. Graham's back. Any of them could be the mimic, and Graham thought of that too. It's why she hasn't let go of her knife in days, even though it's dripping blood from examining the corpses of the former victims of SCP-3890-2. Even though she doesn't need to eat or drink, there is another concern: sleep. The moment she falls asleep, the mimic will no doubt be upon her. She hastily scribbled down a little bit more onto the paper before trying to rest. The sun's going down. I can't allow myself to fall asleep. 3890-2 will come in without a doubt if I do. I don't have to eat, I don't have to drink, but I still have to sleep. This place is designed for the mimic's benefit. It can hunt its prey to its heart's content without them dying of thirst and starvation. Is this an enclosure maybe? Some kind of sick game? My name is Elizabeth Graham. I can't forget that now. This page is my memory. The next word she writes on that paper shows something ominous. She can hear crying outside of her makeshift shelter. The next document, things have changed. Someone named Tony is mentioned in the containment procedures. Someone Graham trusts to take watch while she sleeps and watches for the mimic. The descriptions explain. Tony is a child, only 10 years old, who fell into this dimension, the same as Graham. When walking home from the playground, the mimic can imitate objects, but it can't speak. The boy is real. They've worked on a rudimentary password system to confirm each other's identities regardless. Graham feels almost hopeful. Their chances of survival have doubled, even though they're being hunted, not for their lives, but for the precious memories inside their heads. But she's still worried about other things. If people don't starve or thirst to death in SCP-3890, do they age? How long have the mindless humanoids been wandering around? How long has she been wandering around? Though she reminds herself of her training, she also faces the fact that she might have been exclusively picked for a past reason. I have this memory from my childhood still. Everything around it is gone, but it's sort of floating free, devoid of context. I'm visiting a woman in a hospital. I think it's a hospital, and I think it's a woman I know, a close relative, my mother or my grandmother, I think. And I go to visit her. I'm just a kid, 12, I think, and she doesn't know who I am at all. I don't remember what happened before that or after. Perhaps the mimic brought her here because it knew she would hate having her mind consumed like this. But that would mean it wasn't just intelligent, that it was sadistic and cruel. She noted down she'd asked Tony if he had a similar experience, and they'd be a little closer to working it out. The document is hopeful. Dr. Graham now has something to believe in. The next document is a complete mess. Scribblings and scrawlings in the margins, and the text doesn't even begin to make any kind of sense. It's all word salad, the ravings of someone gone utterly insane. She mentions herself, her own name repeatedly and constantly, but in between are mentions of Tony, the Foundation, the Mimic, and everything in between. Dr. Graham has lost her grip on reality. That, or whatever wrote this, wasn't Dr. Elizabeth Graham. The document after that has a very simple containment procedures. She is to kill SCP-3890-2, the Mimic. Description: I woke up this morning. Tony was gone. He was the Mimic. It was smarter than I thought, I guess. I was stupid. I should have seen this coming, but I was desperate and it knew it. All it left was some scrawled document and a hole in my head the shape of my name. The Mimic, disguising itself as a child, had stolen the last thing she had left, her name. All of Graham's precautions were useless. Even though her name was written down a dozen times in the last documentation, she cannot remember it. In fact, when she reads it, it immediately removes itself from her mind again. Not only has it taken her memory, it has taken her ability to reform them. And the document it left behind is one of her own, an SCP template. Though, of course, she doesn't know what the Foundation is anymore. The same document we have seen previously in the pile. Yes, the Mimic is learning to imitate Graham and getting better at it. Maybe that's why she hasn't been killed yet. It's yet to pin down her thought process and is waiting until it has her perfectly memorized. Not that she would know, given that she's forgotten how she even came here, or when. But the Mimic made a mistake. It took everything from her, even her hope, which has left Dr. Elizabeth Graham a woman with nothing left to lose. She resolves she will not get out of SCP-3890. The documents will probably wind back up in Foundation possession from some testing with an unrelated anomaly, but she will be a mindless husk, or worse. She plans to kill the Mimic. It's a cowardly, fearful stalker creature, and only hunts by pretending to be other things. She knows she can take it in a fight, and she still has her knife. The next document is sober. The object class, neutralized. Dr. Graham walked boundlessly through the desert until the Mimic jumped for her. It unfolded from a cloud, turning into a mass of black origami and lunging for her. It didn't expect her to turn around and slash outward with her knife, piercing its strange black flesh. It let out a scream, shrank, and Dr. Graham realized that it could feel pain. So when it lunged again, she drove her knife deeper into it before pulling back. And she repeated the process until it was a tiny black mite in the sand, and then she crushed it under her heel. It was that easy, that simple. But of course, every time it had come close to her, it had taken another bite out of her mind, just as she took another slash at its form. We opened each other up. I filled its body with holes, and it filled my mind with them. There's not much left of me. She curses herself from not having done it earlier, but maybe there was a reason. She can't remember it anymore. In any case, the Mimic's dying bites from her were particularly damaging, the straw that broke the camel's back. What's left of Dr. Elizabeth Graham is falling apart. She scribbles things down onto the paper, while her mind realizes that she can't even understand what she's writing anymore. The next document is empty. Not every story with the Foundation's agents fighting a monster has a happy ending. There's a quote that says, "The beautiful thing about learning is nobody can take it away from you. But what good is learning if the knowledge might hurt you, drive you mad, or even kill you? It just sits there in your mind, like a stick of dynamite with an invisible fuse. It could blow at any moment. All it takes is a careless slip of the tongue, and you might turn into a talking home appliance." This is a conundrum faced by anyone dealing with an Infohazard, a certain kind of anomaly often dealt with by the SCP Foundation. Before we get into some of the craziest examples of Infohazards and what they've done to people, because let's face it, that's what you're really here for. First, we have to answer that big question everyone's a little afraid to ask. Just what is an Infohazard? And how does it differ from a far more common type of SCP, the dreaded cognitohazard? Well, we're glad you're finally brave enough to ask. First, cognitohazards are anomalies that are dangerous to perceive through one of the senses. A well-known example is SCP-096, which is actually a visual cognitohazard. You see its face and you're toast. It's as simple as that. And cognitohazards exist for all of the other senses too: hearing, taste, touch, even smell. Infohazards, on the other hand, are different. These anomalous effects are triggered when you start trying to express or describe something about what you've perceived. And when you do, things start to get really weird, really fast. Maybe you're trying to explain what you just saw to family members, friends, or the police. Maybe you're a member of SCP Foundation staff trying to write up a report or a new experiment log. Or maybe you're a YouTube channel trying to create entertaining yet informative breakdowns and explanations of anomalies from the SCP Foundation. If any or all of these apply to you, then Infohazards are going to be your worst enemy. But as we look at some of the strangest examples, we'll try our best to resist their effects. First, seeing as it's so hot out, how about we take a relaxing dip in the pool while we tell you all about SCP-1128. What is SCP-1128? Well, that's a loaded question. Technically speaking, it's a massive predatory aquatic creature. But despite its huge size, the creature can hunt its prey in any body of water. Whether you're stepping in a puddle, relaxing in the bath, or say chilling out in the pool, SCP-1128 can track you down and potentially eat you alive. In one particularly horrifying test, a D-Class was drinking from a simple glass of water when the aquatic predator emerged, yanked them inside, and ate them. Okay, so maybe you're feeling a little nervous now, but don't worry, you're still safe. Some people have even survived their attacks from SCP-1128. Well, their initial attacks anyway. The creature has a tendency to come back again and again, relentless in its ravenous hunger for human flesh. Whenever it attacks successfully, all that's left is some blood floating on the water. But again, please don't worry too much about this creature. We don't have another 682 on our hands. After all, it's an Infohazard. It can only start hunting you if you receive a written or verbal description of the creature. Oh, or some kind of visual representation of the creature too. Actually, on second thought, you might want to get out of the pool now. And put down that drink too. Instead, let us tell you a nice little story. You step into a bar, smelling of fine liquor and rich mahogany. You even get a whiff of some fine leather-bound book. You see us sitting at the bar, motioning for you to come over, and you decide to approach. You're intrigued by our winning smile and our vast knowledge of anomalies and SCP Foundation lore. You take a seat next to us and order a drink. Get something fancy. It's on our tab after all. Our treat. What does this have to do with Infohazards, you ask? That's the thing about SCP-1893, kid. We say, our dulcet tones smoother than scotch. You can never just talk about it. It's an Infohazard that forces information about it to be delivered like a story. That's why we're in this bar right now. That's the setup. It expresses actual information about itself through the dialogue, see? You nod, beginning to grasp the concept as the bartender serves you your drink. It's been forever since you've been to a bar. Feels good to be out again, honestly. You drink deeply, savoring the flavor, but you almost choke when you see the man standing in the corner. He's so large and so distinctive. It surprises you that you hadn't noticed him before now. He stands in the corner, a freakishly tall and muscular guy, like a basketball player who decided to become a pro bodybuilder. His muscular arms are bulging out of his white vest, and a pair of bull's horns are tattooed across the top of his bald head, making him look like the devil made flesh. He stares at you with a subdued kind of annoyance, as if to say that you're not in real danger quite yet. But if he wanted, he could grab you and twist your head off like a bottle cap. What's with the huge guy, you ask us, more than a little concern in your voice? Oh, him? We reply with a smirk. He comes with the anomaly. He appears in every SCP-1893 experience to an extent, though his level of involvement varies. If SCP-1893 doesn't perceive you as an annoyance or a threat, then you're good to go. But if 1893 starts to feel like you're gonna cause it some problems, then the guy with the horn tattoos is gonna intervene. Speaking of which, you look up and you see that the giant man is now standing next to you, brow furrowed in visible rage. He picks up your drink and crushes the glass in his hand without flinching, dripping booze and blood onto the counter. He snarls,
I think you've had enough, buddy. Now it's time for you to leave, or we're gonna have to get physical. Capiche?
You don't need to be told twice. You grab your hat, get up and leave the bar, abandoning us on our lonely stool. But our next Infohazard still awaits.
You like poetry? Japanese poetry, yes? The Humble Haiku. It's Dear 931, a unique Infohazard. It's so poetic. Though specifically it takes the form of haiku. So what does that mean? A rigid structure. The first line 5 syllables, then 7, then 5. We can't talk about this in ways other than haiku. It is challenging. Object class is safe. It is kept at Site 19. Need 3rd tier clearance. So what is this thing? SCP-931. It is a rice bowl, white with a blue band and a cracked blue pattern, all inside the bowl. And we must confess, we took that one from the file. Man, haikus are hard. 3 inches in height, 4.5 inches across. Metric doesn't fit. No maker's marks found. Suspected to have been made late 1900s. Really makes you think on the skill of these poets. Sans anomalies. Sure, it can't kill you, but writing these drives you mad. Curse 931. Trapped in this rhythm scheme makes the old man's torture world look like a resort. Okay, let's move on. Other SCPs to see. We're sick of haiku. Okay, back to normal. Time to shake off the structures of SCP-931 and talk about another iconic Infohazard, SCP-3007. This incurable Infohazard is a lot less whimsical than a rice bowl that forces you to write and speak in haiku. In fact, it's literally killed 7 people, and some in surprisingly gruesome ways. The main component of the Infohazard is known as SCP-3007-1. This is an extremely vivid anomalous hallucination that affects those under the 3007 umbrella, known as SCP-3007-2. To be afflicted with SCP-3007 is a truly horrifying and debilitating condition. The hallucinations occur at an average of 4 times a day, with each episode lasting for as long as an hour. And during these episodes, the victims are at risk of grievous bodily harm, or even death. So the question now is, what exactly is the SCP-3007-1 hallucination? To the people experiencing it, they appear to be transported to a strange alien world consisting of a huge number of white towers or pillars stretching into the sky. SCP-3007-2 specimens are trapped on a series of bridges, incredibly far off the ground, that connect these various structures. This anomalous area is known as SCP-3007-3. It is important to remember that people transported to this world still remain, physically, in our own. However, any damage sustained with SCP-3007-3 will carry over into our own reality. To give one particularly gruesome example, some people fall from the precarious bridges and tumble to their deaths in SCP-3007-3. Back in our reality, they suddenly explode from the damage of an invisible high-speed impact, killing them instantly. There's much more to SCP-3007, enough that it probably warrants its own explanation, and the SCP Foundation takes it extremely seriously, believing that if the Infohazard is allowed to breach containment and become contagious, it could result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. As a result, anyone found to be infected by SCP-3007 is contained and summarily terminated to reduce the risk of its spreading. To make things even worse, there are also concerns about SCP-3007-3 seeping into our reality, as those standing within a 2-meter range of SCP-3007-2 during a 3007-1 episode can actually hear the sounds from the terrifying hallucinatory reality. Okay, that was a little scary. How about instead of falling to your death without falling at all, we talk about a nice movie. Gonershrav by Martin Scorsese, one of the best gangster movies of all time. Wait, you've never heard of Gonershrav? It's got everything. Action, suspense, romance, a mountain of black thorns on which lives a dark tyrant of terrible and unknowable power. You sure you've never seen Gonershrav? Well, here's the thing. All signs point to movies like Gonershrav's and many others simply not existing. This comes as a result of SCP-2747, an infohazardous phenomenon that causes people to talk about works of fiction that don't exist. These works often feature commonalities, like an ethereal or disturbing tone, ambiguity, black thorns, and a sinister, mysterious antagonist. The Foundation is doing all they can to hunt down and suppress SCP-2747, but it's proving more difficult than they'd imagined.
Currently, the leading hypothesis is that these tales may have actually existed once, but were erased from reality, leaving only the residue of memory and the odd scrap of evidence around. Many researchers speculate that the various pieces that form SCP-2747 are anafabula, pieces of fiction accidentally composed with the perfect elements to cause them to quite literally erase themselves over time. Now, the greatest concern that the Foundation has about these anafabulas is that they might actually be one, and their reality is on the precipice of collapse. But we really don't have time to unpack that right now, and like SCP-3007, a full explanation of this anomaly would take some time and is probably best tackled on its own. But there you have it, folks, Infohazards. They all say that knowing is half the battle, but in this case, it is the whole battle, and if you know, you lose. Not really a battle at all, come to think of it. More of a trap. But whether it's a vicious megafish, a strangely buff man with bull tattoos, a poetic rice bowl, or a nightmarish ordeal of daily hallucinations, there is no doubt that Infohazards are some of the most strange and fascinating anomalies that the Foundation has to offer.
Oh, and of course, how could we forget the most well-known infohazard of all, SCP-2521. This entity is so infohazardous that its Foundation file entry is written in pictograms. This is because whenever information is recorded about this entity, it manifests and steals it. If you write it down, it'll take the paper. If you make a note of it on a computer, it'll take the computer. And of course, if you talk about it, it'll... Oh no, 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 again, no, 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 no! Ah! Oh, that was a close one. But I'm okay. For now, at least. But don't worry about me. Go check out SCP XK Class End of the World Scenarios Explained, and all the Little Misters Explained for more collections of fascinating anomalies.